Already, so I just went live.
Any other changes?
I'd like to call this meeting to order, this hearing to order. Stand for the pledge. John, would you like to do that?
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We would all remain standing. We have a moment of silence for the brave men and women that protect this great nation, whether it be East Goshen Township or somewhere overseas. God bless them all. Keep them safe. Thank you.
This meeting is being recorded, and at this point, I would like to hand it over to our solicitor, Ryan Jennings.
Thank you. As I've previously indicated, tonight's matter involves a previously recessed conditional use application dated March 29th, 2019 before the East Goshen Township Board of Supervisors. It involves the application of Christopher Zampano for CZ Woodworking LLC, subject property address being 1422 Ardley Circle, tax parcel ID 53-4-107. As we know by now, the applicant seeks conditional use approval from the board for the operation of a woodworking business as a home occupation. The first two hearings in which testimony and evidence were presented occurred on July 9th and August 13th, 2019. And the August 13th public hearing was continued to this evening. Supervisors Lynch and Shuey are not present this evening, as was the case with Mr. Batavio. They are still interested in participating in these proceedings, and I would ask that they be afforded an opportunity to review this evening's transcript and continue to participate as they have in the first two hearings. I'll ask counsel and party if there's any objection to proceeding in that fashion. Mr. Thompson, do you have any objection?
The applicant does not object.
Ms. Boswell?
No, we do have some videos though, so we would just request the opportunity to make sure the other two supervisors have time to listen to.
Understood. But otherwise, no objection?
Since this is being recorded, I would like to ask that you make sure that your mic is on.
Did you hear me?
No.
Is the mic, push the button off, I think.
Yeah, I did. There we go.
Now,
Take the
that's
mic out of
better.
the holder and hold the mic is sometimes better.
Thank you. I can't get it out, or I will do that later. We don't object, except I would just like to point out to the board that we do have a couple of videos that we would like to give extra copies to the members who are not here this evening to hear the live.
Understood. Ms. Setzler, is there any objection to proceeding in that fashion?
Mr. Jennings, no. We also have some audio videos, but if it's being recorded, hopefully they will be recorded as well, but no objection whatsoever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Mr. Justin Millier here? And I only ask that question because he does have party status, but it does not appear he's present at this time. With that being said, is there anyone now that wishes to request party status that isn't already represented? Sir, could you please come to the podium and I'll ask you some basic questions about your name and address. Could you please state your name for the record?
David Judith,
Could you spell your last name?
G as in George, U-I-G-A,
And what is your address?
1420 Ardley Circle.
And are you immediately adjacent to the subject property?
Yes,
And did you recently purchase that property?
yes.
What was the date of settlement, if you recall?
August 30th.
Who did you purchase the property from?
The Corvinos.
Does any council have an objection to admitting David, say your last name again for me,
Judith.
as a party to these proceedings? Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Jennings, I don't have an objection. I believe the property is adjacent to the applicant's property. I would raise an objection. The board did previously accept Mr. Corvino and Mr. Corvino and Mrs. Corvino as parties. Given the fact that they no longer own the property, I have a deed dated August 30th. I would object to them being parties to the application.
Okay.
It was my intention to notify the board that they were no longer eligible for party status.
Okay.
As of the 30th.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Boswell, do you have any objection?
No, I
Okay.
have no objection, thank you.
And I did notice that Mr. Millier has walked in and joined us this evening. Do you have any objection to this gentleman being admitted party status?
No, I do not.
And are you okay, Mr. Millier, with the two absent supervisors to continue to participate in these proceedings, having an opportunity to read the transcript?
Yes, I am.
Okay, hearing no objection to the request for party status, this gentleman will be granted party status. So just so you're aware, that will afford you an opportunity to call witnesses, present evidence, and cross-examine any witnesses that will be called by the other parties. I'll advise you as to the appropriate time for that.
Okay.
Just as one final housekeeping item, I would like to introduce and admit an additional board exhibit, namely Exhibit B10, which is a letter from myself dated August 14th, 2019 to the parties of record, indicating that the proceedings would be continued to this evening, Thursday, September 5th at 6 p.m. I have copies of that letter and we'll pass them out at a later point in tonight's proceedings. Last time we were here, all of the parties had an opportunity, including the public, to cross-examine Mr. Thompson's second witness, Mr. Zampano. So at this time, I'd ask Mr. Thompson as to whether he has any redirect examination for his client.
I do.
Very good. Let's proceed.
Should we go speaking to this, or do you want me to have a second?
There's people all the way in the back, so I
Yeah.
would suggest push the button up.
Oh,
We have one up there. If it's not working, well, this was working. Testing, testing. It won't work. Better if you share. There it is, yeah.
Mr. Jennings, I do have some follow-up questions for Mr. Zampano.
please proceed. Mr. Zampano, I'll remind you that you are under oath.
Mr. Zambano, would you take a look at Exhibit JB10? You have that exhibit?
Yes.
And just to be clear, do you perform furniture stripping as part of your refinishing services?
No.
What is furniture stripping?
Furniture stripping, to my understanding, is using chemicals or solvents to strip old furniture that may have a finish on it in order to expose the bare wood in order to refinish it.
So the indication of refinishing services on JB10 does not include furniture stripping, does it?
No.
Would you agree that you cannot perform and do not intend to perform furniture stripping as part of your proposed home occupation?
Yes, I agree.
Would you take a look at Exhibit JB14? This was a post on Facebook almost 5 months ago on April 18th, correct?
Correct.
When you posted this, were you excited at the prospect of conducting your CZ woodworking business at your current residence?
Yes, I was.
Were the statements on this post an exaggeration, in your opinion?
Yes, they were.
Do you intend there to be an office, a design center, or a showroom on your property?
No, I do not.
Do you understand that these uses are not part of your application and cannot be permitted in the accessory garage on your property?
Yes, I clearly understand.
Would you take a look at Exhibit JB17? These are testimonials and reviews from your website. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Some of these testimonials refer to your team. Who is your team?
Sometimes these client testimonials, which are from very loyal and supportive clients, there's somewhat of embellishments of these projects and projects I've done for these clients in their homes that sometimes are involved with other helpers or artisans or craftsmen or designers that help to contribute to the project as a whole.
CZ Woodworking is just you though, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to show you an exhibit marked Exhibit A17. Just print out for the website. What is A17?
These are projects from my portfolio on czwoodworking.com.
Do you know how many projects are listed in Exhibit A17?
I believe there's 74.
And are all these projects fine woodworking projects that you've completed?
Correct.
Are some of the projects individual pieces of furniture that are made in your shop?
Yes.
Do some of the projects involve wooden built-in furniture that you made partially at your shop and partially at the project site?
Yes.
And are some of the custom woodworking projects represented ones that you built made completely at a client's property?
Yes.
And have you built wooden or composite decks as part of your business?
Yes, I have.
And how many of the 74 projects on your website were custom wood or composite decks?
I believe 5.
Do you have any other businesses other than CZ Woodworking?
No.
Does CZ Woodworking do anything other than craft projects out of wood or wood-like materials?
No.
During your testimony at the last 2 hearings before the board, you used the term general contracting as something you did as part of your business. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what did you mean in using that term?
Some woodworking projects require coordination with other contractors, including electricians, plumbers, other artisans, and craftsmen. I make sure that I help to facilitate those projects, those woodworking projects, and coordinate them with these other craftsmen.
And are you a general contractor, as you understand that term?
No.
Does CZ Woodworking perform general contracting services?
No.
Do you build houses?
No.
Do you build additions to houses?
No, I do not.
Do you remodel kitchens?
No.
You have an exhibit, it's marked A18, it's titled Power Tool List. What is this exhibit?
This was asked by the board for me to compile a list of all the power tools that I own. So this is a list of every electric power tool that I use for both shop production as well as on-site installation.
Are some of these tools stationary and some portable?
Correct.
Generally, do you use these tools one at a time?
Yes, generally. Unless it's connected to dust collectors, so I would use two at a time if I was using the tool and the machine that's used to collect the dust.
How many of these tools or machines did you choose to run simultaneously in order to test the sound levels for the proposed use?
I believe there's 5.
And that was in addition to the dust collector and the air filtration system, correct?
That is correct.
Based on your experience as a woodworker, were these the tools that you felt made the most noise?
Correct.
And you chose these tools because you believe they were the ones that made the most noise and the ones that you used most frequently. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Have you heard your neighbors using power tools?
Yes, I have.
Do you know which neighbor?
I believe so, yes.
Which neighbor?
The Jahani residence behind us, directly behind our property, as well as the Moyer residence, I believe.
You can hear those noises on your property?
Yes, correct.
Does one of your neighbors have a backhoe on his property?
Yes, that is correct.
Have you heard or seen your neighbor using a backhoe on his property?
Yes, I have many times.
Now, the noises of a backhoe and the noises of power tools, are they the noises you would expect to hear from time to time in a residential neighborhood?
Objection. How did he know that? I don't think that was like speculation.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
The noises that he's heard from his neighbors, were they the types of noises that he would expect to hear in a residential neighborhood?
A backhoe and power tool? I don't know the relevance of the question.
Well, we're talking about noises that are made by power tools. So I think he's allowed to give an opinion on whether or not he's heard these types of noises in the neighborhood.
I think it's relevant given the prior testimony regarding noise and proximity to noise generation. It's appropriate.
I don't object to him testifying that he's heard the noises. I object to him testifying that they're typically heard in a residential neighborhood. I don't know how he could know that.
I think they're ones that I asked whether he expected to hear these in his residential neighborhood.
In a residential neighborhood is the question.
Okay. Can we change the question to in?
In his residential neighborhood, are these the types of noises you would anticipate hearing?
Yes, absolutely.
No further questions.
Ms. Boswell, do you have recross examination on that limited basis?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Jennings, thank you. Mr. Zampano, I believe at the last hearing, I asked you if you were licensed as a contractor by East Goshen Township. Do you remember that question?
I believe so, yes. When I applied for an application, they required that I submitted that, when I applied for a permit application, they required that I apply for a contractor permit with the township as well. It was the township's
But
requirement, yes.
you just said that you were not a general contractor, yet you have a general contractor's license from East Goshen Township, is that correct? Yes or
I'm going to
no?
object.
Yes or
This
no?
question was asked and answered at the last hearing. Yeah, and the last hearing was 2.5 hours of cross-examination, and I don't think we need to rehash every question that was asked.
I think, I think, Mr. Thompson, you raised the question of whether or not he's a general contractor, and he said, no, he's not, which is contradictory to what he's testified during that 2.5 hours of cross-examination.
Well, no, I would disagree. If he has applied for a license under the Home Improvement Contractors Law of Pennsylvania, that doesn't make him a general contractor.
No,
On the application, I'm listed as a carpenter, but doesn't have listing as a general
I'm
contractor.
sorry, I asked a question, I don't need to have, a thesis and answer.
Okay, well, let's pause. And I think that the question was asked and answered. I think Ms. Boswell did. I think the question was answered in such a way where the witness said and agreed that he filled out a contractor's license application based on township requirements. Ms. Boswell, your question then added the word general to the concept. And I don't think that that's what the witness testified to. So perhaps you can rephrase your question or ask a different question.
No, that's okay, I think the record will speak for itself in terms of what he said last time and what he said this time.
Okay.
Mr. Zampano, you mentioned that you have meetings with architects, engineers, various other people in connection with your CZ Woodworking business, is that correct?
That is correct.
And where do those meetings take place generally?
Usually in the client's home.
Do they ever take place at your CZ Woodworking shop?
No.
Wherever that might be?
No.
Sure. These questions relate to the cross-examination that was asked last time. I had some questions about that. One was, you mentioned that there's shelving that outlines where your 500 square feet is.
So wait, I'm going to object to the question again. We had an entire hearing of cross-examination. I had some redirect. Questions emanate from that redirect. I don't have a problem with it, but I don't think we need to redo the entire cross-examination.
No, and that's not my intent. I think that there were other people that asked questions of Mr. Zampano last time, and I was unclear as to what his answers were.
Well, I think, as you previously indicated, the record will speak for itself. The transcripts are available. And I do want to limit, for purposes of these proceedings, now this recross examination specifically to the redirect that Mr. Thompson just had this evening. That being exhibits JB 10, 14, and 17, and exhibits A 17 and 18. So let's keep the recross examination subject to those parameters.
Okay, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Mr. Zampano, exhibit A18, the equipment list.
Yes.
You testified that you had equipment in the store, in a storage unit and some broken equipment. Are they on this list?
Yeah, all the power tools I currently own are on this list, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so there's nothing else you own that would, that does not appear on this list?
No, I've listed everything that I own, ma'am.
Thank you.
It's pretty extensive, yes.
I have nothing further.
Thank you. Mr. Millier, do you have any questions based on Mr. Thompson's questions of his witness from this evening?
This one's repaired up here, I believe.
John? Yeah, why don't we switch them?
Let's switch them and,
Make sure that wire, we don't
don't break it.
Version tested. Does it turn? You gotta turn. It is on.
I just want to clarify, I think it's two tools. So the one was, I think it's broken with planer. Is that correct? It's broken?
Yes, correct. I no longer.
Okay. Are you
I'm sorry,
planning,
I think there's answers.
he said,
Yes, I no longer own a planer.
are you planning to replace the planer or is,
So that's to be determined.
and I didn't see the, list of tools that were tested. The one I was curious about was a router. Was that when you guys did the testing with the acoustic engineer?
Yes, that tool is listed plus other, yes, it is listed.
And it was used during the testing?
It is listed, yes. It's the-
Yes, it is listed
So that was tested.
and tested, yes.
All right. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you. Mr. Guja, do you have any questions for the witness based on the questions that you heard here tonight? No. Thank you. I'll now turn to the board. Does the board have any questions regarding tonight's testimony?
I have one more question before I in exhibition 18, just for clarification work. The expert witness that appeared for you guys on TV screens had a list or had tested various equipment either singly or in combination with one another and made the case or made the point that it did not exceed our noise level. This list, is there anything missing from this list that was included in this time? And I think it would be helpful to know what combination of, which individually or in combination of these pieces of equipment were used in what he testified to. Because I don't recall ever having that information, but it seemed like that was germane to the issue, and it would be, at least to me, it would be helpful if I'm correct in my assumption that equipment be identified as to what was tested singly or in combination.
It's all the equipment that we had submitted in our first hearing, I believe, with the board. It was listed on their, I don't know which exhibit this is, but A4. It would list all the equipment that was tested as well as in, that's from Mr. Thornton's, from his actual testings and his report. It does list the machines that were tested. The woodworking equipment in the CZ building consisted of the JET 10-inch contractor saw, the JET air filtration system, the JET 14-inch bandsaw, the JET 6 1/4-inch joiner, the DeWalt 12-inch chop saw, the Delta 1.5 power dust collector, as well as the rigid 2 horsepower router. So these were the pieces of equipment that were tested simultaneously in order to produce the highest level of recordings that we could produce by running solid woods, hardwoods, and softwoods through those pieces of equipment while the testing was being conducted by Mr. Thornton.
Somebody passed this to me, I can see money and check them all, but Mark, is there, or Mr. Zambano, is there a reason that Exhibit 18 was presented when when the equipment was listed in either singular and common, that he testified to? I'm trying to figure out how I use what you brought out tonight in combination with what he testified to, the equipment he used to test the sound levels. That's what I'm trying to do.
Sure.
I just don't know how to do that. Or why was this presented when we had the list of the equipment that was used? Because it seems like unless you or Mr. Zambano would be willing to testify that none of this equipment itself or in combination would exceed the noise level that we have in our ordinance, I don't see the benefit of what this is for. This one, I do, the one that was previously testified to, because it clearly demonstrates which equipment was used in combination or singular. And I believe in all cases, if I remember the testimony, none of it exceeded the noise requirements that we had in our ordinance. So this list to me, when in some combination, either singular or combination, have to say somehow the same thing, or I don't know what it's used for.
Allow me to interject first of all and make explanation, and I'll allow the witness to answer, but the board had asked during the question portion last time on August 13th, on page 83 of the transcript, it appears that Mr. Zampano was asked to compose a list of the power tools that he owns. So I think that is why that list is being introduced this evening, but I'll allow anyone to provide any additional clarification to that point.
That's exactly why I did present this list at your request, just to list every single tool that I possibly have. I'm not trying to hide anything. When I took the test,
I was refreshed. I don't have the transcript, so I gotta look at it, but it would seem, I just want to, okay, I'll yield to that you were asked to do something and you did it. The simple fact of the matter is, I don't know, I don't think this has any useful purpose as compared to what your witness used to support the conclusion that the tools in singular and combination didn't surpass our noise limits requirements.
I think it's, as I just testified in Mr. Thompson's redirect, that we took the tools we thought, and I thought from using years of woodworking, that these were the loudest machines, the machines I use most frequently, and put my best foot forward in order to try and present the best readings I could to prove that we did not exceed the ordinance. The first time I ever presented on decibel readings, I was not even asked to. I came to the first planning commission meeting because I assumed that noise might be an issue, it might be a concern. I presented all those readings I took on my own and basically presented a full extensive report. I presented to the planning commission at the first meeting. Then they asked at the planning commission meeting to have Mark Gordon come out and do a second reading. So then we went and did a second reading at the second plan before the second planning commission meeting. We presented those readings again with equipment that I thought was the loudest equipment that I had, and these are all the same tools. We then presented those readings at the next planning commission meeting, which then the opposition, I was saying kindly, tried to shoot down because they weren't done by an acoustic expert. So, and then they wouldn't accept Mark Gordon as an acoustic expert. And Mr. Gordon was unable to verify his readings with the proper type of decibel meter and the proper type of testing. So we were asked to then get an acoustic expert to verify those readings. We then got an acoustic expert to come in and take the same recordings with the same machinery, obviously then present his.
I do understand all that.
I'm sorry.
I would withdraw my question only because in answering the question just the way you did and the documentation you have in the transcripts clearly demonstrated what you used, what the readings were, all that other stuff. This can just be a piece of information as far as I'm concerned, and that's fine. I didn't mean to take the time. I forgot about the other aspect of it. I don't know who asked for what reason, but it doesn't really matter at this stage of the game. So I appreciate you.
I'm just trying to clarify the whole process from start to now, how we got from point A to here, and why we presented this. I hope it helps.
Are there any additional board questions at this time? Hearing none, are there any questions from members of the public for this witness that aren't otherwise represented? Hearing none, we'll move on. Mr. Thompson, do you have any additional witnesses or evidence to present?
Not at this time.
Ms. Boswell?
Yes, Mr. Jennings, we do have some witnesses on behalf of Ms. Bean. With the board's permission, I'd just like to hand out some pre-marked exhibits.
Sure. Please feel free to approach.
Thank you. I just handed out some pre-marked exhibits. They're actually exhibits JB1 through JB7, and a few others. I didn't reproduce all of the exhibits that I used last time. I'm hoping the board has those, or at least do have a few extras of those if you need them as we go through. I'd like to ask, just a point of order, two of our exhibits, as you can see, JB3 and JB7 are audio videos. I made copies onto a flash drive to give to whomever would like them. Obviously other council, but I only have 5. So I guess what I would like to ask for permission, if indeed we need more, that we be able to do that after tonight's hearing. But for now, I think I will give the flash drive to Mr. Thompson and to Mr. Jennings. Okay. I do have 2 more for the other board members.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So that ought to do it, actually. And Mr. Gordon is not here. He had been ready at past meetings to play those for us. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. I'd like to ask Ms. Bean to be sworn, please. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Jennifer Bean, 1424 Ardley Circle,
Could you spell your last name, please?
Bien.
Is there another microphone, perhaps?
Yes, I'm the mic guy.
Mr. Beer.
Watch the board, please.
Okay.
Would it be easier if the witness stood in
Yeah.
there?
It's not gonna go any further.
Okay.
We'll pass out everything.
You want to swap?
Why don't you swap?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson needs the power.
Okay. Now we don't have to. What is your profession, please?
I'm retired.
In front of you is a set of exhibits. Could you please turn to exhibit JB1, please, and identify for the board what that is? It's leading to my home. Okay. Your home at 1424 Ardley Circle?
Yes.
Okay. Could you please turn to exhibit JB2, please, and if you would identify that for the board?
I believe that's the Ardley Circles neighborhood subdivision plan.
Okay. Can you identify where your lot is on this plan?
Number 7,
And can you identify where the Zapata lot is?
number 8.
Thank you. Now I'd like to show you what we've marked as exhibit JB3. But before we do that, do you know what your property is zoned?
It is R2, I believe, low density residential.
So your property is not the same as the Zapata property, is that correct?
I would assume so.
And did you receive notice of this hearing in the mail?
Yes.
Okay. Could you please describe your property and the neighborhood generally?
It's a very quiet, I would use the word sleepy neighborhood. The street itself, Ardley Circle, is 6 homes, and then homes adjoining on Bramble Lane. Generally speaking, the character of the neighborhood, it's pretty quiet. Neighbors are pretty private, but generally everybody's got each other's backs. People are very helpful in times of need. For example, I had a tree come down and Greg was on it, said, "Let me get my backhoe and come and take that off your driveway." So it's a wonderful place. It's very tranquil, very sleepy. It's been great with the cicadas chirping in the morning this time of year. It's a wonderful neighborhood.
And how long have you lived there?
Almost 20 years.
Okay, that is your residence, correct?
Yes, it is.
Can you see the Zapata property from your house?
I can.
Can you see the garage, which is the potential location for CZ Woodworking from your home?
Yes.
Okay. I've marked exhibit, a panorama video, we call it, exhibit JB3. Everyone has a cover sheet that just describes what this is, and on the flash drive, the image that you would expect to find, and then when it was taken. So can you explain, before we show that, could you explain what exhibit B3 is?
The video that I took, I just stood at the edge of my deck and did just a surround, just kind of panoramic view to just be able to see starting at the left of my property, and then all the way around to the back, and then where the Zapata property is, just to kind of be able to illustrate that there's no buffering there in between my property and theirs, as well as just kind of the peacefulness of everything that you see.
Okay, and you say you took a video.
I did.
And when did you take the video?
I took it on the 3rd of June.
Does it accurately represent the current condition of the property?
They've made some changes that really don't think have anything to do with the business.
They being
I'm sorry,
Zapata's?
the Zapatas made some changes that I think are just personal. I don't think it's about the business. They put up 3 fences, and I think there's a trampoline you'll see that's no longer there.
Okay,
But I don't think it has anything different about the business.
is there anything else you'd like to note to the board before we show it?
Just again, I want to illustrate that I believe Mr. Zampano testified that he thought that there was sufficient buffering between all the properties, and I just want to show what is between mine and his property.
Okay, so that would be flash drive 3259. Panorama video. Thank you. Is that the Zapata shed that we're seeing right now?
Yes, that's a shed. It's a shed.
And is that the garage?
Yes.
That we've been talking about? Thank you. Okay, now I'd like you to turn into your exhibit book to exhibits JB4, JB5, and JB6. It might be easier on these to set them, beside one another. Could you please identify for the board what exhibit JB4 is?
Yes, that's taken from the back of my property in order to just illustrate the different rooms from which you'll see different photographs.
Okay, so did you take this photograph?
I did.
When did you take it?
believe it was the 8th of July.
Okay, and does that accurately depict your property?
Yes.
Okay, and so just, so you've noted, did you write these things on there?
I did not write this.
Did someone on your behalf write
Yes.
them? Okay, so it shows where the family room is,
Correct,
where the Florida room is on the second story,
correct,
and where the kitchen is on the first story,
yes,
adjacent to the deck, is that correct?
yes.
And there's a little 4 there, circled on the left-hand side of the page, what is that?
That's just there to illustrate that's where I was when I took the photo that we'll submit, which shows the view from the deck.
As photo 4, correct?
Correct.
Okay, could you please turn to exhibit JB5 and explain for the board what that is?
Yeah, this is just similar to the last, but from the side, to show where my master bedroom window is, which actually faces out to where the Zampano garage is, and as well as my family room below. And we'll see to the right, again, the Florida room windows, and then where you see the number 3 in a circle and an arrow, that's to my door to my kitchen, from my kitchen to my deck.
Okay, and from all of those windows on exhibit JB5, you can see the Zampano's garage clearly?
I can't see it clearly from the family room simply because I have something blocking that window, but yes, very clearly from the bedroom and the other rooms.
Could you turn, I'm sorry, and you took this photograph about approximately when?
The same day was the 8th of July.
Okay, and that's currently, accurately depicts what your house currently looks like in the
Yes.
rooms. Okay. Please turn to exhibit JB6, and you'll note there's a series of 4 photographs, is that correct?
Yes.
Could you go through one at a time
Sure.
and identify what they are, where you took them, and as you need, refer back to the prior 2 exhibits we just went over?
Yes, so the first one is taking out my master bedroom window, and I took that on the 7th of July.
Okay, and so if you turn to exhibit JB5, that would be photograph number 1 is identified next to master bedroom, is that correct? Okay, so would you say that you have a clear view of the garage from that?
Absolutely,
Could you please turn to exhibit JB6 number 2
yes.
and describe what that is, where you took it, when you took it?
I took that on the 6th of July, and that is from my Florida room.
So if we look at exhibit JB5, I see that there's 2 number 2s there. Could you describe which window you took that picture from?
It's from the window where the 2 in the circle is.
Okay. And do photographs 1 and 2 of JB6 accurately represent the current conditions at your property?
Yes. Oh, with regards to their business, I mean, as I said, there's been some fencing put in there that has nothing to do with the business.
You need to speak up, please, and a little bit slower.
I'm sorry.
So in what ways does it not depict what's currently there?
The only thing that's different is there is now a split rail fence. If you look where that tree is on the right, we're looking at JB6 number 2, but nothing to do with, I would think, nothing to do with the business.
But notwithstanding the existence of the fence, can you still see the garage
Absolutely,
and the cars parked in front of it?
yes.
Turning to exhibit JB6 number 3, please. Could you first describe what it is and when you took it?
Yes. This is taken outside my kitchen, or just inside my kitchen door. I took it on, I believe that was also on July 8th.
So on exhibit JB5, that would be, there's a little 3 in a circle pointing to a door. Is that where you took the picture from?
Yes,
Okay. And how about the conditions? Are they currently the same as what's shown?
yes.
That fence would be visible that you stated,
Right,
but your view of the garage is not any different. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay, and then finally, exhibit JB6 number 4. What is that and when did you take it and where did you take it from?
I took that from the edge of my deck on July 8th.
Okay, so looking back, I think we now need to look at exhibit JB4. Does that depict the little number 4 in a circle? Does that show where you took that photograph from?
Yes,
And again, you would say that there's been fencing added by the Zampano since you took this picture in July, is that correct?
yes,
But do you still have a clear view of the garage?
Yes.
What rooms in your home do you use the most?
Well, obviously my bedroom, my kitchen, my family room, are the primary places. And even though I don't have as clear a view out from my family room, I do, hear sounds from there.
You said what's obstructing your view from the family room?
My own television on.
So if you close that all more, you could see clearly?
I could see more clearly if I closed it.
Okay. And you also spend time on your deck, is that correct?
Not as much as I would like, but yes.
Okay. And again, can you see the CZ Woodworking garage from each of these locations?
Yes.
And can you hear sounds and noises from the Zampano property when you are in your home?
Yes.
Even with the windows closed?
Yes.
What kinds of sounds can you hear?
Normal day-to-day life sounds like, training the dog or, closing a car door, those kinds of things that are just life. I've heard that, in Sunday afternoons when they go up on the fence, I can hear that. Nothing that's now the ordinary in that regard. Right now, of course, they've just started, working on the addition. So that's obviously unusual sound, extraordinary sound, but the good news about that is that we'll have an end. And so
When they were, I don't know if they're still constructing the garage, but when they are constructing the garage, do you hear that?
Absolutely, we heard that, yes.
Okay. All right. Were you here for the prior two hearings in this matter?
Yes.
And did you hear Mr. Zampano's testimony?
Yes.
And did you hear the expert presented by Mr. Zampano, his testimony?
I did.
Okay. Did you hear him say that his testing indicated that sounds were not audible at your property line?
I did.
Okay.
And I couldn't believe it.
Okay. We're about to introduce what we've marked as Exhibit JB7. Could you describe for the board what that exhibit is?
I'm sorry, I really lost it. Thank you. Yes, this is video that I took from my bedroom window the day that the sound tests were being conducted at the Zampano property.
How do you know it was the same day? Did he testify that he took the test on June 25th, 2019?
Yes.
Sometime between 12 and 2 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay, and you were home at that time?
Yes.
And describe for the board what happened.
I was actually in my bedroom and I heard noises start up and I went to the window and saw what was happening. And so I opened the window and reported sound that I was heard.
What noises did you hear with the window closed?
I'm certainly not an expert with tools in any regard, but I heard what I would say would sound like saws. It was a kind of buzzing, a grinding, kind of a whining sound.
And you heard that with the windows closed and then also with the windows open?
Yes.
Can you explain for the board what Exhibit JB7 is?
I'm sorry. No.
Yeah, what is the video that's been marked JB7? Did you take that video?
Yes.
And did you take it on June 25th
Yes,
at 12:43 p.m.?
I believe so.
Okay. At this point, can we play that? That would be image 387.
I'm going to object, as our sound expert testified. There is no way to calibrate a video, presumably taken from a phone or some other audio device, that would have an accurate representation of what the actual sound was that day. The testimony being that someone can just turn up the volume and we sitting in the room might think that this is a very loud sound, when in fact in the environment, it wasn't. I think that this is highly prejudicial. I think that it's not the best evidence for what the sound test revealed, and I would object to playing that video at this hearing.
And I would respond if I might, Mr. Jennings.
Sure.
Ms. Bean just testified that she heard the sounds of saws, that she recorded it at that time. She's going to listen to what it sounds like, and she will testify, is that what she heard or is that what she didn't hear? This isn't, we're not suggesting what the decibel level was. What we're offering this for is clear evidence that she can hear, and she testified without this, that she heard it. And so I think it's highly prejudicial to her if she's not allowed to let the board listen to what she heard. And if what we listen to is lower than what she heard, perhaps she'll say that. If it's higher than what she heard, perhaps she'll say that. But I think she deserves a chance to have this evidence heard.
Again, because the fact you can't calibrate this, I don't know what the volume is going to be, and I don't know, and I don't think there's any way that this board or the witness can indicate accurately that this is the level of sound that she heard that day. I have no problem with her saying or testifying that she heard something. That's not the standard that's in the ordinance. But as far as how loud it was, we did the testing for a reason, and that was to determine that the levels were within the levels associated with the ordinance.
Once again, this is not offered with regard to the levels in the ordinance. This is offered for a couple of reasons. Number one, the expert testified that per his testing, there was no sound audible at the property line, number one. Ms. Bean contradicted that. Number two, I think that it's the quality of the sound that is an issue, not just the loudness of it, the quality of the sound that's being heard, whether it's 60 decibels, 20 decibels, 80 decibels. I think the quality of the sound is very relevant to the impact on Ms. Bean.
I guess I would say I don't know what the quality of sound means.
Because
We did an objective
had a chance
test.
to hear it.
Okay, I've heard enough, it's fine. As we all know, the formal rules of evidence do not apply in these proceedings. The video potentially has relevance to these proceedings, so I will allow it to be played. And this board will endeavor to afford the appropriate weight to the video as it deems probative. So with that.
I guess I would ask, what's the volume that you're going to play this at? I think that's relevant to know.
Sure, we will give you we'll name what device it's being played from and what volume level it's at, if discernible. But Mr. Thompson, your objection is noted, and your expert did provide testimony as to the potential for manipulation of sound recordings. So that is of record and not lost on all of us here this evening. So with that said, the objection is overruled. We'll play the video and we'll get the information from the sound player.
Yeah, so I would just observe that the volume is approximately 50%.
Very good. And where are we playing the video from?
From a Dell laptop.
Very good. Sure.
Mr. Rolshaw, if I could, would you, in your opinion, would this be a normal volume that you may listen to, or
I'm
you
not a
can't
witness.
say?
I'm not a witness.
Okay.
The radio's just, it's 68 on the TV.
Thank you.
Presumably.
Thank you. Let's play the video.
Ms. Bean, is that representative of what you heard on June 25th when you took this video?
It is. And if you'll allow, you could hear there's some conversation that's happening down there too. So you can tell I didn't crank the volume up to try to exaggerate the volume.
What did you take this video on? What device?
My iPhone.
And did you do anything to the volume before you took it?
No, I just wanted to capture the sound when I heard it was happening.
And how did the township get this video to play?
We put it on a flash drive. Very.
Did you
Computer
email it to Mr. Gordon at his
Yes.
request? Okay. What are your concerns about the operation about CZ Woodworking operating at this location?
Well, as you just saw, that was out my bedroom window. They have asked to be able to operate from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. I'm retired, I don't get up before 7 o'clock in the morning, I like to sleep later. I find it very disconcerting to think that that could be allowed to happen on any given day. And then, you know, it's kind of like if I wake up at 7 o'clock, the anxiety of, oh my God, is it gonna start? Am I gonna hear this? Am I gonna be able to go back to sleep? It's all very disconcerting to my quality of life.
Do you have a concern about just the volume of the sound?
Not just the volume, but also the tone, the pitch.
Do you have a concern about the constancy of the sound?
I have a major concern about not being able to predict what my environment is going to look like at any given time. In a neighborhood like ours, you should be able to generally have an idea of what it's gonna sound like in the neighborhood. Yes, somebody might come and mow the grass once a week, and yes, somebody might blow weeds off the deck. But in any given day, to not be able to have an idea of what it's going to sound like is just unimaginable.
You said you were retired, correct?
Yes.
So you do not leave your house every day to go to a job, is that correct?
That's correct.
Has this potential use of this property already impacted you?
Yes, very much.
In what way?
I'm gonna object because he hasn't actually engaged in the use yet, so I think that is a speculative question.
Well, I think she heard the sounds of what was being tested when it was being, what was proposed to be used in that facility when it was being tested. And she can answer the question, and if it's speculative, the board will figure that out.
I'll overrule the objection and allow the question to be answered.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat?
How has this use already impacted you?
Well, obviously, it's not been an inexpensive proposition to have to defend my right to have my quiet enjoyment of my home. It's caused a lot of anxiety. I couldn't believe when I heard that sound that could be the rest of my life if I stayed here, that I could be subjected to that.
Do you ever see, did you hear Mr. Zampano testify that he has a truck and a trailer as part of his business?
Yes,
Did you ever see those vehicles?
yes.
Okay, this is an exhibit that was introduced last time. I just wanted Ms. Bean to authenticate it because she took it. I don't know that you necessarily need to see it, but it was exhibit JB 24, photograph 4. Can you identify for the board, please, what exhibit JB 24, photograph 4 is?
It's a picture that I had taken at some point last year. And it identified, it shows the truck and the trailer
In front of this
in front of the
proposed garage?
Yes,
Was that picture zoomed?
I don't remember honestly.
Okay. But that is the trailer that you see?
Yes,
So you can You can clearly see those vehicles in front of the garage, correct?
He normally parks the trailer, he tucks the trailer back away, so the trailer's, the visibility of the trailer is not an issue.
But it could be an issue, correct? When he's using the trailer to, okay. If the Board of Supervisors was to approve this application, what conditions would you like to see imposed in order to lessen its impact on you? First of all, do you believe that the impact could be eliminated?
I don't believe the impact would be eliminated.
What conditions would you like to see it lessened, perhaps?
A couple of things that could lessen it would be to get some buffering in between our properties. The previous owner, there had been some birch or evergreen trees before that some hunters purchased the property. And maybe that could be something, I don't know that it would help with the noise, but it would help with the view and the comings and goings that might be going on.
And currently, there is no buffering between
That's correct.
your property and the Zampano property, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And then I guess the biggest thing would be the hours of operation. It just does not seem reasonable to me that we could be vulnerable 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, to have this quality of life that many of us have enjoyed for 20 years or more, just, at risk. So I would love to think that we could still have our mornings, have our beautiful, peaceful mornings. Mr. Zampano, I believe, testified at the last hearing that it's quite limited the time that he actually needs to be using the tools. So if that's the case, I would ask that we could limit the time in which he could be using power tools or even hammers and chisels and those kinds of things that make noise.
You're aware that the zoning ordinance has many restrictions on how this business could operate should it be approved, correct? Are you aware that there are ordinance restrictions?
Yes.
Do you have any concern about how those would be policed moving forward?
Oh, well, yes, I do. It's obviously a very awkward thing to think, I don't want to be that crazy neighbor hanging out the window taking pictures and saying, trying to record sound and saying, help, how are we going to, police this? So yes, I have a lot of concern about that. It's a very awkward feeling now, and it's unfortunate.
Did you hear Mr. Zampano testify about the lighting that he would intend to put on the garage?
Yes,
Does that concern you?
very much, because his garage, as we said, faces my bedroom window, my kitchen. If he's going to uplight that building at night, that would be a concern for me.
Do you think buffering would assist in that, lessening that impact on you?
It would help from the first floor probably. I'm not sure if it would help from the second.
Do you have, did you hear the testimony and see the exhibits that there is out there in the internet world identifying the CZ Woodworking as a business and its location at this location with hours of operation? Does any of that concern you, and why?
Sure.
I'm just gonna object, what does out in the internet world mean? I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, let me be specific then, Mr. Thompson. Do you remember the exhibit JB12 that Mr. Zampano acknowledged that this was from his website, and it sets forth hours of operation, is that correct?
I'm sorry. Yes.
If we could just for a moment, Mr. Thompson, with that clarification provided, do you withdraw your objection?
I sustained his own objection.
Behind this. I'm still gonna object. We have requested hours of operation as part of the application. Those are the hours we're requesting. And anything on the website, it's really not relevant to the application.
The question is advertising hours of operation of a business on a website for people to see, is there any concern that you have about that in terms of potential people coming to the property.
Before you answer, ma'am, I'm going to overrule the objection. I think it was relevant and it was discussed last time to some degree of length. So I think that it is relevant and that question can be answered.
Yes, of course it concerns me.
And Exhibit JB 13 as well. That's another example of doing a Google search, correct? And having the CZ Woodworking show up with the address of 1422 Ardley Circle, Westchester, PA. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, with hours of operation.
yes.
Okay. And why would that concern you?
Well, just because we're such a residential neighborhood, it would concern me to think that there could be, traffic of some kind generated.
Just a few more questions, Jennifer. Do you feel that this use is suitable for the property in question?
Absolutely not,
And why not?
because it's a residential neighborhood to introduce something that is essentially operating as industrially, really. This isn't somebody who's selling real estate or cutting hair. These are tools that are going to create noise that is going to impact our quality of life.
Could they potentially also create, could the usage also create dust and odors?
I don't know what I don't know, and yes, absolutely. all of
I'm
those
gonna object, she said she didn't know.
That's her
And
answer.
then she
I'm sorry.
She said she didn't know.
No, I said,
I'm
I
gonna
don't know
object.
what I don't
And
know.
then she went on to answer the question after she said she didn't know.
I think she should be entitled to finish her answer.
Ms. Bean, do you have any further answer to provide in that regard?
There are a lot of unknowns that do concern me. Dust could be one of them. I have a well. I don't know if anything would get into the water supply. As has been stated, this business hasn't started yet, so that's what I mean when I say I don't know what I don't know, because I haven't had the opportunity to experience it yet.
Do you feel that this use is designed, constructed, well, you don't know, it's not operating yet, but based on the limited operation you heard, has it been designed, constructed, and operated to that extent and maintained? Well, you don't know that either. Let me start again. Do you feel that the garage has been designed and constructed to be in harmony with the character of the existing development?
No,
And do you feel that the use will be detrimental to your property and others in the vicinity?
I do. It concerns me for our quality of life as we're living there. It concerns me, should we ever not want to live there anymore, the marketability of our property will not be the same as what it was. There's a lot of reasons for concern. And my biggest thing remains, for me personally, the noise and the fact that my bedroom faces that operation.
Okay. I don't have any further questions for Ms. Bean.
Ms. Setzler, do you have cross-examination for this witness?
I do not.
Mr. Millier, do you have cross-examination for this witness?
I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, do you have cross-examination for this witness?
Yeah, I'd like the witness to take a look at the second picture of exhibit JB6. Let me know when you have that.
Yes, I will. JB6 number 2?
Correct.
Yes, I have it.
And do you know where your property line is on that?
I do not know exactly what my property line is.
There are two bare spots just beyond your deck. Do you see those?
I do.
And do you know if those are on your property?
No, I'm pretty sure they're on Mr. Zahara's property, but it's that everything used to be.
Do you know how far away the garage is from your property line?
I do not.
And was it your testimony that there were trees planted in the location along the property line at some point?
Where those bare spots are, is I believe where the previous owner had, evergreen trees. And they removed that prior to listing the house.
And those trees were removed by the previous owner.
Yes,
Do you know why?
I do know.
Were those trees dead?
They weren't in the best shape, but I don't think they were dead.
And did those trees provide screening from the previous property owner's activities?
Yes, they did.
So are you not happy now that those trees are gone, so that you can see the property?
Am I not happy that I
Yeah,
can see the property?
is that, would you prefer that those trees be replanted in that location?
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's because you don't like looking at the Zampano property, is that correct?
It's because I don't want to have to see the comings and goings of the business.
Well, there is no business there, so.
There is going to be a business.
Well, let me just ask you.
I think Mr. Thompson's getting to be a little bit adversarial with the witness.
I'm just,
Objection.
I'll allow it, but I don't think it's inappropriate.
the question I asked was, do you not want to look at the Zampano property?
And she answered that question.
I don't think she did.
Yes, I don't want to look at the Zampano property.
And what on the Zampano property causes you not to want to look at it?
I
Is there any?
think I know where you're going, Mr. Thompson. I don't really want to look at anything. There's a whole lot going on that property. The fact is that if this is approved, we don't know what's going to be coming and going from that shop, and I think it's reasonable to request that I get some kind of buffering protection.
Were you aware that if a home occupation is approved, that one of the requirements in the ordinance is that you can't tell that the home occupation is being done on the property?
Objection, I'm not sure I understand
There's
that
no
question.
outside evidence of a home occupation on the property.
Ms. Bean is not an attorney. She does
Well,
not have the ordinance requirements memorized.
other
In
than
fairness, Ms. Bean did testify to familiarity with the ordinance and various provisions thereof, so to the extent she can answer the question, I'll allow the question to be answered.
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
Are you aware that the zoning ordinance does not permit Mr. Zampano to have any outside evidence associated with proposed home occupation use?
I don't have any idea.
Okay. And the parking of the cars in front of the garage, does that create an issue? Do you have an objection to that?
No,
And previous to the garage being constructed in that location, was there a shed or any other structure in that location?
yes, the shed that we saw on the far left of the property on the video was previously where the new garage is.
Which exhibit, which video were you
I'm
referring
sorry.
to? The panoramic
Panoramic
video?
video.
That would be exhibit JB3, correct?
Yes.
The picture, exhibit JB 24. Photograph 4.
Yes?
You know where you took that picture from?
No, actually, I really don't remember, but it looks like from the way the angle is, it was probably from my bedroom.
And you said you didn't know whether or not you used a zoom lens for that picture, is that correct?
I don't remember. I would think I
Would you
did.
agree that it looks like that picture was taken from just beyond the swing set on the Zampano property?
I'm just beyond it, well, I'm looking down on it. But I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Your house is not that close to the Zampanos'
Correct.
garage, correct?
That's correct.
That excuse me,
You said you were concerned with Mr. Zampano's testimony that he wanted to provide lighting on the garage, is that correct?
Yes,
What concerns you with him lighting the garage?
I'm just concerned about the potential impact that it has if that's lit up at night and my bedroom is overlooking it.
And that's because you don't want to look at the garage, is that correct?
objection. She didn't say she didn't want to look at the garage. She said she's concerned about the lighting of the garage at night with her bedroom overlooking it.
There has to be some reason why a lit garage is going to cause an issue for a neighbor.
Well, you know, she said what she said, Mr. Thompson. I don't think you
Bright light in the back of that house is not, in the back of the house is not a customary thing. I'm concerned, it could be that it's not a problem, but I am concerned that it could be a problem.
And is the Zampano's house currently lit up at night?
There is objection relevance.
Well, we're talking about lighting the garage, and if the house is lit, then certainly it's relevant for what you can see from her house.
There's one light that I can see,
Excuse me, Mr. Jennings has to, I'm sorry, rule on the objection.
I will overrule the objection. I do find it to be relevant.
there's one light that I can see on the side of the house. It's something I can see from my kitchen, but I'm not really aware of it upstairs.
And do you have an objection to that light?
No?
So let's talk about the video that you took on June 25th. What device would you use to take that video, I guess, on audio recording?
Asked and answered objection.
I think you said
Are you looking for additional specificity?
yes.
My iPhone.
And that doesn't have anything, well, let me ask this question. That there was a sound in the background of that video. Do you know what that's, apart from the noises that were coming from the Zampano property, do you know what that sound was?
There was some conversation I heard from when the gentleman came around the building, but I'm not sure what other sound you're speaking of.
Guess maybe we need to play the video.
Is that your request? You want to play the video again?
Well, there was a background noise in that video, and I'm asking the witness if she knows what that background noise is. And if you don't know, then I guess you can answer and say you don't
Well, if
know.
you want to play it again and then ask me when you hear it, I'll certainly do my best.
All right, you can stop. It's the noise
That's the
blowing
wind,
noise.
the wind.
Okay, that's the wind. So you didn't have any wind screens on the iPhone or anything like that?
Absolutely not.
And can
I
you
wish I were that
generally,
sophisticated because I
you
didn't
generally-
think like that.
can you generally hear the wind?
Yes.
When you're in your house?
Yes, in fact, you heard it even more so on the panoramic.
And did you think the wind was making a lot of noise that day?
I did not. Yeah, I did the day of the panoramic video. I didn't think of the day of the sound.
But you could hear the wind in that video, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And that video was taken with the windows open, was it?
yes,
And could you hear the noise when the windows closed?
yes.
And did you take any video of the sound tests while the windows were closed?
I believe I probably did. There were about 20 minutes off and on that I would capture different sounds, but I didn't submit any of it.
Okay. No further questions.
Does the board have any questions? Excuse me. Does the board have any questions? Board Ms. Bean. Do any members of the public who do not have party status or are otherwise represented by counsel have questions for Ms. Bean? Do you have anything further?
Just briefly, Ms. Bean, you could hear the equipment being tested above the wind noises. Exhibit JB7, correct?
Correct.
And you don't mind looking at the Zampano property as a residential property, do you?
I don't mind looking at the residential property. I am concerned if and when this business were to start of what I might be seeing.
Are you concerned that the lighting of the type described by Mr. Zampano could interfere with your sleep?
Yes.
And if you would, I did forget to ask Ms. Bean about one exhibit, and it is related to her direct testimony. I'd like you to look at exhibit JB 34, if you can identify what that is for the board.
It's a Church and Township memorandum,
What's the date of it?
June 13th.
And who wrote it and to whom did they write it?
It was from Mark Gordon, I guess the board supervisors.
And could you read the last sentence of, first of all, what is the source of this document?
The township website.
Okay. Do you recall, was this from the website for the 7/9/19 Board of Supervisors agenda?
I believe so.
Okay. And is this an excerpt of that agenda, to your knowledge?
I believe so.
Could you please read the last sentence of that exhibit?
Yes.
I'm going to object. That's hearsay. Mr. Gordon did not offer an opinion on sound. He did not testify at this hearing. And reading a memorandum from him with his opinion is not relevant or probative, and it's in fact hearsay.
I don't think it's necessary for Ms. Bean to read the content of this document. I mean, it's a proposed exhibit and it's written, the content of which speaks for itself. So I think that the board is aware of this document, seeing as though it was addressed to the board, and will afford due weight to the document. I don't think it's necessary to.
I just want to ask her one question about it, if I might.
Sure.
Are you concerned about future monitoring of this use? Should it be approved when the township does not have the equipment necessary to measure pure tone?
Yes, I found the last sentence quite disturbing because how can we approve something that we don't even know how to test for, how would we police it, or how would the township police it if they don't have the equipment to do so? That was my understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you. I assume there are no additional questions based on that, Mr. Thompson.
Mrs. B, were you home on September 4th, Tuesday this week?
When I home on September
I'm
4th,
sorry, the 3rd?
I'd ask for an offer of proof of the relevance of this question.
Mr. Zampano witnessed and heard grinding noises and the use of a backhoe. I'm sorry, grinding noises coming from the Jahanian's property, and I wanted to understand if she heard those noises or found an objection.
I don't recall hearing anything like that.
That's all I have.
Thank you. At this point in time, I would like to take a break. I think 5 minutes would be appropriate. Let's reconvene then.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Seriously. Oh, like an airdrop thing? Well, if you want to like, send me a solid and like email me something, give me. It's just a better idea. Okay, so, it's too big. You don't have to.
We like.
Take it back to it. I still say like to hear you testify.
Well, this is like, you
I hear you.
I wasn't sure. I was hoping it was working.
I was, police station.
Oh, you're still on this side.
You're on the
What's the other side?
Reserve.
Small.
Yeah.
Was getting way.
Which actually, that never.
Sorry.
You're right.
So, she's done this like, how big is it? How big is the shop?
I don't think this is.
Yeah, this is, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And they were talking about
All right, we're gonna get started again.
Not on. Mark, I told you not to touch this microphone.
You have another new battery? All right, let John work on that. All right, we're gonna go back on the record. Ms. Boswell, would you like to call an additional witness at this time?
Yes, Mr. Jennings, I would like to call David Babbitt, please. Mr. Babbitt, could you please be sworn?
I do.
Mr. Babbitt, could you please state and spell your name?
David Babbitt, Babbitt.
And what is your business address?
P.O. Box 922 in Fraser, Pennsylvania, 19355.
And by whom are you employed?
I apologize. I'm self-employed, David C. Babbitt and Associates, LLC.
You have a set of exhibits, do you not?
I believe I have an entire set. I cannot guarantee that.
Do you have exhibit JB 25? That would be in the
Yes.
smaller set, okay. Could you please identify for the board what exhibit JB 25 is?
This is my curriculum vitae.
Okay. Please summarize your background for the board, please.
I have been a professional planner now for longer than I care to remember. It's 30 years. I started at the Montgomery County Planning Commission between 1989 and 1997. In 1997, I left and formed my own private practice, so I've been in private practice now for about 22 years. In addition, in 2003, I believe it was, for most of that year, I served as the interim Director of Planning and Development in Lower Providence Township, Montgomery County. I also teach courses in planning and zoning under the auspices of an organization called the Pennsylvania Municipal Planning Education Institute. I teach 3 courses, comprehensive planning, subdivision land development review, and zoning. There have been courses actually held in this building at various points in the past X number of years.
As part of your work as a planner, what is your familiarity with zoning ordinances?
I have read probably 200 or 300 zoning ordinances, not necessarily cover to cover. I have written many zoning ordinances. I have written numerous zoning ordinance amendments. I consider myself to be an expert in zoning.
Do you advise municipalities in the drafting of ordinances?
I do. I'm working on securing a contract with the Montgomery County Municipality to do just that right now.
What kind of accreditations do you have or licenses to the extent that's relevant?
I am a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, that's AICP. I'm a member of the American Planning Association, and I am a member of the Pennsylvania chapter of the American Planning Association, what formerly was known as the Pennsylvania Planning Association.
And Pennsylvania does not require a license for planners, is that correct?
That is correct.
But you are licensed in New Jersey, is that correct?
I happen to be, yes.
Okay. In the course of your profession, do you review, interpret, and analyze zoning ordinances?
I do.
Do you have specific experience in evaluating whether uses are permitted uses under zoning ordinances?
I do in every different perspective imaginable, I suppose.
Do you have specific experience in evaluating whether uses are accessory uses under zoning ordinances?
Yes, that came up several times in Lower Providence Township and elsewhere. I was not the zoning officer, but the zoning officer was a colleague of mine, and we often discussed different uses that people were engaging in residential districts, whether they did or did not comply with our ordinance.
And do you have specific experience in evaluating whether use is appropriate for a given area?
I do.
And in your current private practice, who are your typical clients?
Well, there's generally 3 categories. One would be developers. I do a great deal of work for private developers. I do work for municipalities, and I also do work for private landowners who hire me on cases such as this.
You have never done work directly for East Goshen Township, is that correct?
That is correct.
Have you testified before municipal bodies before?
Yes, dozens, scores of times,
And have
maybe
you,
over 100, I don't know.
have you been accepted as an expert witness before municipal bodies in the past?
Again, scores or maybe over 100 times, yes.
And are you familiar with the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code?
Yes, I am.
At
I have my copy right here.
Is there anything else about your CV and Exhibit JB 25 you'd like to highlight for the board?
No,
Okay, at this time, I'd like to request that Mr. Babbitt be accepted as an expert in land planning and zoning.
Mr. Thompson, do you have any questions of this potential expert witness?
Mr. Babbitt, have you ever written any zoning ordinances?
yes, several.
I see a lot of fiscal impact analyses. Looks like most, if not all, fiscal impact analyses under your major studies. Is that what you focused on as part of your profession?
It is an area of concentration that at this point represents probably about 40% of my practice.
You did that as part of land development subdivision applications for private clients?
Most of the time, yes. There were times where I was hired by municipalities to either prepare fiscal impact analyses for developments or review them.
Ever testify about a home occupation application?
Yes, I'm actually going to be testifying in another township in a matter of weeks on a similar matter.
On behalf of an applicant?
Yes,
An applicant for a home occupation?
yes,
What type of home occupation is
a
that?
bed and breakfast.
Okay. I don't have any questions about his qualifications.
Do any additional parties have questions regarding Mr. Babbitt's qualifications and planning and zoning for purposes of this proceeding? Hearing none, Mr. Babbitt is so recognized.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Mr. Babbitt, have you been engaged by Jennifer Bean to evaluate whether the woodworking business proposed in the conditional use application filed by Season Woodworking and Christopher Zampano is a permitted accessory use under East Goshen Township zoning ordinance?
Yes, among other issues, yes.
Are you familiar with the conditional use application and the home occupation permit application filed by the applicant in this case?
I have reviewed both, yes.
Are you familiar with the Zampano property located at 1422 Ardley Circle where the proposed woodworking business is to be located?
Yes,
Are you familiar with the Bean property located at 1424 Ardley Circle?
I am.
And are you familiar with the general area?
I am.
And how would you describe it?
I believe Jennifer's characterization as a sleepy residential neighborhood. It's a quiet cul-de-sac. It is an extraordinarily appealing neighborhood of very nice homes with almost no outside influences. You don't hear highway noises. It is a very nice, quiet, established, stable residential neighborhood.
Okay, and have you personally visited the site?
I have.
Okay. I'd like to just do a housekeeping matter, really. Could you turn to Exhibit JB 24, photographs 1, 2, and 3, please? And in addition, there is page 2 of photograph 1, which I handed out a few minutes ago.
Yes.
Did you take photograph 1 in Exhibit JB 24?
Yes, I did.
And when did you take that?
July 16th of this year.
And does that photograph accurately depict what is being shown in the photograph?
Yes, it was not doctored in any way. Yes.
Okay. Photograph 2, same questions. Photograph 2 of Exhibit JB 24. When did you take it?
Same day.
And you were, with respect to both photographs, you were on the Bean property when you took it, correct?
Yes, was very careful not to trespass.
Okay. And, photograph 3, same questions, when did you take it?
Same day,
And is that picture zoomed at all?
yes,
Okay. I handed out to the parties and the board before your testimony, what we've labeled Exhibit JP 24, Photograph 1, Page 2. Could you describe to the board what that is, when you took it and what you?
right, well, we're gonna get to photograph 4 as well, right?
Yes,
Okay,
well, you didn't take photograph 4, correct?
Right.
Ms. Bean took photograph 4.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
Photograph 1, page 2 is the same as photograph 1. It is merely a blow-up of a certain area of that photograph. It's the same photograph.
Okay. What do you want to, what is the purpose of your providing this photograph to the board this evening?
Well, specifically, page 2 shows what I saw that day, the day I visited the property, which appears to me to be boards stacked up against the building and underneath the tarps along the ground next to the building. The boards that are stacked up against the building appear to be long, planed boards, 4 feet, perhaps even 5 feet. I do not believe that this would represent firewood unless, of course, someone has a 4 or 5 foot long fireplace.
Okay.
Instead, I would take it one step further and say that these appear to be boards to be used in woodworking.
Did you attend the first night of the hearing in this matter that took place on July 9th?
I did not.
Did you read the notes of testimony from
I
that
did,
hearing?
yes.
Okay. Did you attend the last hearing, which was on August 13th?
I did.
And were you here for the entirety of that testimony?
I was, yes.
Okay.
And I reviewed the notes of testimony for that hearing as well.
Okay. Have you been present from the start of the hearing this evening?
I have.
So you've heard the testimony of Mr. Zambano and Ms. Bean, is that correct?
I have.
Okay. Are you familiar with provisions of the East Goshen Township Ordinance that are applicable to the proceedings tonight?
Yes.
In the course of your work for Ms. Bean, did you review the East Goshen Township zoning ordinance, and specifically what sections did you review?
I reviewed several sections, though not obviously the entire ordinance. I reviewed the R2 district. I reviewed the home occupation standards. I believe I reviewed all of the accessory use standards, the conditional use standards. I reviewed the 3 industrial or business districts in the township. I reviewed various definitions and some other sections as well.
Okay, going back, the R2 district, would that be section 240-9?
That's correct.
The definitions, would that be 240-6, I believe?
I believe you are correct. I do not know that I printed that section or all of that section.
Okay. You mentioned accessory use regulations. Did you specifically review section 240-32?
That's correct.
You referenced general conditional use standards. Was that specifically section 240-31?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And did you also review section 240-7, the intent provisions for residential districts?
I believe I did, yes.
So in your opinion, are you familiar with the zoning requirements as they are applicable to this application?
I believe I am.
And how did you go about determining in this case whether, in your professional opinion, the proposed business is an accessory use that is customarily incidental to the residential use of the Zampano property?
Well, the first element was to attempt to learn everything about the proposed use. That would be from the conditional use application, from the home occupation application, from the notes of testimony of the hearings, and from any other documents that were provided to me. I also endeavored to learn as much as I could about the zoning ordinance of the township and the applicable provisions of the ordinance. I visited the property, I walked up and down the property line, I just looked at the property from the Bean property as well as from the street. I looked at the property from aerial photography on my computer in my office, and did some various other tidbits of research regarding elements of the application for the ordinance.
And before we'll delve more into the reasons for your opinion, but did you come to a conclusion as to whether or not the proposed use is customarily incidental to a single-family residential dwelling?
I did come to a conclusion. My opinion is that it is not customarily incidental to a residential property.
Okay. In your knowledge of accessory uses, what is the first criterion that one must meet in order to be a permitted accessory use?
Well, the concept of customarily incidental to the principal use is the primary consideration in discussing whether an accessory use is applicable or appropriate.
And in fact, if we look at exhibit JB 26, page 3, number 6, I'll give everyone a chance to find that. This is section 240-32J, paren 6, close paren A, and it is on page 3 of that exhibit. We numbered the bottoms of the pages.
I'm sorry, what is the section number again?
Well, first of all, let me identify what is exhibit JB 26.
It appears to be various provisions, sections of the zoning ordinance.
Okay, so the section that I asked you to turn to is section 240-32.
Right.
J.
All right.
For
It
home
won't take a while to flip pages to J.
Well,
Oh, there it is, next page.
Page
Home
3,
occupation.
right.
Correct.
What does A, could you just please read what exhibit A, excuse me, what section A says? Section 6A.
Standards. A home occupation must comply with all of the following standards. A would be use. The home occupation must be an accessory use.
You know, I'm gonna object. We have to listen to someone read the zoning ordinance into the record. We've been at this for quite some time. I think we can all agree it says what it says.
Well, let me just comment on that, okay? Everyone says we've been here for such a long time. The applicant, you know, protestants to an application do have under the MPC 100 days from when you finish your case. You finished your case this evening. So that's number one.
I'm
Number
just
2
objecting to
is,
reading an ordinance into the record.
well, you know, he's done. You also had a comment about how long we've been here. The residents have had no chance whatsoever to present their case.
I will sustain the objection to the effect that we need not read into the record verbatim the content of the zoning ordinance. Now, if we can summarize it and cut to the chase and speak to what the criteria is and whether this expert has an opinion as to compliance with those provisions, then so be it, I'll allow it. But let's try to not read verbatim text of the ordinance. We all have copies, we all see what it says.
Does the zoning ordinance require that a home occupation, in order to be accessory, must be clearly incidental to the residential use of the dwelling?
Yes, clearly incidental.
Okay. Are you familiar with woodworking at all?
I am.
In what capacity?
I am a hobbyist. I've been working with wood since I've been a kid. I have a wood shop in my parents' basement. I have a wood shop in my basement now. I make furniture generally, small things, shelves, cubbies. I've made a chair, actually once made a sofa. I have maybe 8 or so power tools.
Have you ever sold any of your work?
No, I
Okay.
wish, but no.
You can conduct your hobby intending it to be for profit?
For profit, no.
Okay. Are you familiar with the requirements of section 240-9E1, which is on page B of JB 26?
Yes. That's permits accessory uses in accordance with provisions of 240-32, which is what we just looked at.
Okay, and are you, I think you've testified that you are familiar with the requirements of section 240-32, J in particular of the zoning ordinance as they relate to home occupations. Is
Yes,
that
that's
correct?
correct. Yes.
Okay. In your opinion, if the proposed use is not clearly incidental to the principal dwelling, does the board have the discretion to approve this application?
You mean, does the board have the discretion to deny it?
Either.
Okay, if
Must.
the board feels that the proposed use is not clearly incidental to the principal use, meaning the house, then the board obviously has the authority to deny the application. And I would suggest even the responsibility to deny the application.
And are you familiar with the legal principle that home occupations allowed by zoning ordinances are those that are customarily associated with residential dwellings in accordance with general experience and understanding?
Yes, in a general sense, yes.
Okay. So if we look at the zoning ordinance, there are specific requirements, there are specific uses that are prohibited as home occupations, is that correct?
That's correct. They
And
are,
those would be found on page 4 of exhibit JP 26, correct?
that is correct.
Which is
Item-
what's,
Item number 7, use is not permitted.
okay, so you stated that your opinion is that the proposed use, as you've heard it described, and as you understand it from the documents you've read, is not customarily incidental to a residential use, correct?
That's correct.
Why don't you just explain to the board the rationale for that?
There are several ways of approaching the answer to your question. One is to look at the use itself. The use itself, I believe, I would argue, is a manufacturing use, albeit at a smaller scale. It's not a million square foot factory that's Ford engines or Mack trucks or anything like that. It's at a smaller scale, but it's still manufacturing. I would note that manufacturing is defined as
Well, let's back up. It's just the zoning ordinance define manufacturing.
it does not.
Okay, so is your understanding that in that case, we would look toward the common understanding of the word, including dictionary definitions?
Dictionary definition. So I
Okay,
looked at dictionary.com. It was easier to do that than it was to pull the dictionary down off the shelf. And the dictionary.com definition is the making of a good or ware is W-A-R-E, either by hand or by machine. And this would fall into that category, I believe. This would be the making of a good, namely an item of furniture or another piece of art or a work created by hand or by machine. In this instance, very likely both.
okay. Are you familiar with the definition of industrial use in the zoning ordinance?
I am.
I'm handing you, something's not marked, but it's section 240-6 zoning definitions, correct?
Yes, the definitions of the zoning ordinance.
What does that definition, how does that define
Well,
industrial use?
Under industrial use, it does list manufacturing as one potential element or an example of an industrial use.
And so in your opinion, is the use that Mr. Zampano hopes to use on this property a manufacturing use? An
It is.
industrial use?
It is, again, albeit at a smaller scale than a large factory. It's still manufacturing by its very nature. So the use itself is manufacturing. That is one area, one way of looking at how to approach this. Another is the scale of the use. Now, again, it's not a large industrial concern that covers 50 acres and has 700 truck deliveries every day. but it is at a scale, I would argue, far exceeding that of a normal residential use for, say, a hobbyist. Like
Such as
myself.
yourself, correct?
Exactly. A hobbyist is going to have a handful of tools, is going to be in the wood shop, 1 or 2 days a week, if everything works out perfectly. I haven't built anything since late last year in my wood shop, just for lack of time. Mr. Zampano submitted a list of tools that I believe counted something like 35 power tools. By comparison, a typical hobbyist like myself, I think I have about 8 or 9 or 10.
You're referring to Exhibit A18, I believe?
I believe it is correct, yes. The size of the tools is significantly larger than what you would find in the shop of a hobbyist. The cost of the tools.
I'm going to object. He is qualified as a land use planner, but he's not an expert in woodworking. We're talking about the size and cost of woodworking tools.
Well, he's testified that he is familiar with woodworking based on his own hobby. He's also testified that he has been reviewing ordinances and evaluating uses based on specifics of that use for somewhat 30 years, I think he said. So.
Well, I haven't had any foundation laid for that opinion.
I'm just confused as to where we're going with this. What point are you trying to demonstrate?
Well, I believe he testified that there's several ways to look at whether something is customarily incidental. The first was the type of use, and he testified that in his opinion, he believes it's manufacturing. Now he's moved on to the second approach, I believe, which is the scale of the use. And he is testifying as to what he's heard and read that this use will be, and his knowledge as a land planner as to whether or not, well, let me ask this. Is this the type of use, if you were representing a municipality in drafting a zoning ordinance, is this the type of use that you would recommend that a municipality allow in a single-family residential district such as R2?
Objection, the ordinance says what it says. It allows certain parameters for the use, and whether or not you would draft a different ordinance.
Look, you've asked for foundation as to what his qualifications are for talking about the scale of the use. So I think his 30 years of experience in this field is certainly laying a foundation for his opinion as to whether or not the scale of this use is properly deemed customarily incidental to a residential district.
East Goshen Township defines a home occupation and the parameters of it, and it's irrelevant what he thinks.
No, but the very first, but I think, Mr. Thompson, I think that you're skipping over the very fundamental piece that I do not believe your client has proved, which is that this is customarily incidental. By the way, it's your burden of proof, not ours. But this is, Mr. Babbitt has been accepted as an expert, and this is part of the reasoning for his determination.
I'm going to overrule the objection, but when we're discussing objections, let's try to refrain from inserting personal opinions and legal argument.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Well, you were discussing the second approach toward determining customarily incidental, and you were talking about scale of use. I don't know that you have much more to say on that,
Yes,
but
a
if
few
you do,
things.
let me know.
In terms of the numbers of the pieces of equipment, this is significantly higher scale than what the hobbyist would have in a home. In terms of the cost is much greater than what it would normally see in a hobbyist's home. In terms of the number of hours per day, the number of days of the week when those pieces of equipment would be used is significantly higher in a proposed application compared to what a hobbyist would use in a home. Most hobbyists will have day jobs. They may be able to get to the shop for an hour or two in the evenings, maybe on the weekends. Now this use is being proposed for 5 full days in the week, plus I believe some Saturday hours as well.
No, not Saturday hours.
Not Saturday hours, I apologize. But still significantly higher than what a hobbyist would have. The scale, again, is significantly greater than what you would see as a residential use. It is a commercial use, it's an industrial use, it's not a residential use.
You might have been confused by some of the exhibits which list Mr. Zampano's hours of operation, including a Saturday, perhaps. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a third element?
Yes, and the third element is the impacts of the use. And the impacts of the proposed use, I would argue, are significantly greater than what would customarily be seen for a typical residential use, which is one of the standards in the ordinance. It's much more excessive than what would be experienced by neighbors compared to, for example, a hobbyist working in a wood shop in a garage or in a basement. And those impacts might include things like the sound, the vibration, the aroma or odor of solvents.
Again, I'm going to object. These are all speculative issues. We're talking about things that he has no personal knowledge of, and he's just speculating that sound and noise, and he's not a noise expert, he's not an expert on aromas.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think she is establishing a foundation, and I don't think he's testifying to anything specific. I think he's establishing his basis for going about an analysis of the zoning for this proposed use.
Were you finished with your answer, Mr. Babbitt?
I suppose yes.
Okay. In Exhibit A, JV 26, pages 4 to 5, I believe you testified that
One moment, JB 26.
yeah, if it's easier for you, I'll refer to the ordinance section.
Oh.
It's easier for me to refer to the page. It's section 240-32. J, which as we've established is the home occupation section, is the accessory use section.
Yes.
Item 7.
Page of that?
Pages 4 to 5.
Yes, that would be uses not permitted.
Have you reviewed that section?
I have several times.
And do you have any opinion as to whether the proposed use would fit within any of those categories?
Well, I would consider it to be a use that is of a similar character to the uses above, in particular something like furniture stripping or
And those are listed in, excuse me,
Objection. He said, objection. My witness testified that he did not participate in furniture stripping, so I don't know how he could say that it's similar to furniture stripping.
he just said it's a use or activity which is in similar character.
Withdrawal.
yes, I believe it is a use that is similar in character.
And you're reading from subsection T of that section, is that correct?
That is correct.
That a prohibited use is any use of a similar character to those listed above, which are specifically prohibited, correct?
That's correct. And in addition, I would add letter U, any use or activity which creates a nuisance. Because I think there is a great potential for nuisances created regarding this use.
Okay, before we get on to the nuisance piece, were there any other sections that you felt were similar? Never mind that. Let's talk about the nuisance piece. And again, you said you're familiar with the standards for home occupations as an accessory use set forth in section 240-32J6, correct?
Correct.
And does subsection D reference a nuisance standard?
It does.
I'd like you to read the relevant pieces of that section, please, in order to
Well,
facilitate your testimony on this point.
in my opinion, this provision prohibits any equipment or process that creates any sort of nuisance that the keywords here are in excess of levels customarily generated by residential use. Again, we're going back to the question of scale. If somebody creates a piece of furniture and paints it in a garage and the neighbor smells that, I think that would be fine. That probably wouldn't even be considered an accessory use if it happens once or twice a year. If it happens 4 or 5 days a week, every week of the year, as a home occupation, as an accessory use, then yes, that would be a nuisance.
And this home occupation could theoretically, under the ordinance and under the proposal, occur 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, correct?
Something like that, yes.
You've heard the discussions, I believe, about the noise standards and that there's specific reference to decibels in terms of determining whether or not a noise ordinance has been violated. Are you familiar with that testimony?
Yes, I read that testimony.
Okay, and I'm looking for the sections, but I believe it's not part of the zoning ordinance, at least one of them, it's part of the general township code.
That's correct.
And I believe it's section, township code chapter 156, is that correct?
I don't have that section in front of me.
Okay, and are you familiar that there's also general performance standards in the zoning ordinance itself?
Yes, there are.
Set forth in section 240-24C.
What page number is that?
It's not in your exhibit,
Ah.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to trick you.
You almost got me. Yes, I reviewed those sections. I don't have them in front.
Right, and those, do you have any reason to disagree with me that they do reference decibel levels?
No,
Okay, but the standard we just talked about, the nuisance standard, also references noise, correct?
it does,
Okay.
without referencing decibel level.
So in your opinion, is decibel level the only way that noise could be problematic with respect to the conditional use standards for this use?
I'm going to object. He's not an expert in sound or noise. He's an
It's
expert
a question
in
on
land use planning.
ordinance interpretation, which is what he was qualified for.
I agree, I'm gonna overrule the objection, I do think it asks for an opinion that passes through this ordinance's interpretation.
Yes, the section 6D does not reference any specific decibel level, but it simply prohibits uses that would represent nuisances beyond the property line, again, in excess of levels customarily generated by residential use.
Okay, thank you. Are you familiar with the specific standards for conditional uses and special exceptions, generally not specifically for the home occupation, set forth in section 240-31C, which is on page 26 of your exhibit?
I am.
Do you have any opinions as to item 2A, as to whether or not, let me back up. Do you have any opinions as to any of those standards with respect to this application and whether or not the proposal would satisfy those standards?
Yes, I do. My opinion is that the proposal will not satisfy several of the standards of conditional uses and special exceptions of this section.
And which sections would they be?
Well,
And why?
I would start with B, which is be suitable for the property in question. Again, we're talking about a quiet cul-de-sac, a residential street, and we're talking about inserting a business that is engaged in what the ordinance defines as an industrial use in that quiet cul-de-sac residential neighborhood. So I don't believe it's suitable for the property in question. It will likely have impacts beyond the property line that are far in excess of levels customarily seen in residential neighborhoods in the township. It will not be operated to be in harmony with the character of the existing development in the general vicinity. Again, this is a commercial or industrial use in a quiet residential neighborhood.
You're referring to
That's
subsection
C,
C.
correct. D, I do believe it has the strong potential to be detrimental to the other property in the vicinity. And even though there may be opportunities to mitigate some of these impacts through buffering, landscaping, fencing, and the like. There will nonetheless very likely be impacts that extend beyond the property lines in levels in excess of the typical residential uses.
And did you comment as to subsection D?
That was D.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Have you reviewed the provisions of, the use provisions of the other districts in East Goshen Township?
Not all of them, but some of them.
Which ones have you reviewed? For example, did you review the industrial and planned business and business park districts?
Yes, the I-1 light industrial district, that's Article 4. The I-2 planned business research and limited industrial district. I guess they're all in Article 4. And the here somewhere, yes, here it is, the BP Business Park District.
Okay. In your professional opinion, is this proposed use permitted in any of those districts that you just referenced?
Yes,
And
I believe it would be permitted in all of them.
Okay, why don't we start with the I-1 light industrial district? If you look at pages 7 and 8, why do you say that this use would be permitted there?
The I-1 light industrial district under paragraph C, permitted conditional uses. Number 4, manufacturing of products. And again, under number 25, manufacture and assembly of any of the following. Under sub B, products from previously prepared non-toxic materials. I believe similar language applies to the I-2 planned business research and limited industrial district.
Let's go back for a minute.
I'm sorry.
Why do you say that this use would be permitted in those? Did you mention, just explain a little bit more for the board on that.
This is, again, an industrial use, a manufacturing concern, a business, which belongs in a business district, not in a quiet residential cul-de-sac. And the reasons why, lots of reasons why it would be more appropriate for an industrial district, again, have to do with things like greater setbacks from residential areas, performance controls, limitations to odors and noise and vibration and so forth, but also provisions dealing with things like design of properties, truck access, buffering and screening, signage, and so forth. Again, this is a business that belongs in a business district, not in a residential district.
Let's just talk about the setbacks for a moment. Did you review the setbacks of the R2 district? That would be on page C of Exhibit JP 26. And did you compare those to the setbacks of the highlight industrial district, for example?
The setbacks in the R2 district would be front yard 45 feet, side yard 20 feet each, rear yard 50 feet. In the I-1 light industrial district, it would be 4-acre minimum lot size, for example. Front yard of 35 feet, but again, that would be from a street used for industrial purposes. Side yard of 50 feet and rear yard of 100 feet. I believe there's also a minimum zoning district boundary setback in this article somewhere. So there are safeguards for protecting adjacent residential uses from the effects or impacts of manufacturing and other industrial uses.
And those what do you call them, protections? What do you call them?
Safeguards.
Safeguards, do they exist in the R2 district?
Not nearly to the same extent. There are minimum lot sizes and lot widths and setbacks, but they're designed for a residential context, not for businesses.
Okay, quickly moving to page 12, talk about why you think that this proposed use would be permitted in the I-2 planned business research and limited industrial district, section 240-20D.
Right.
Whatever you think.
Under D, it would be under number 1. production, testing, storage, manufacturing. This is a manufacturing concern, and it would be permitted under that provision in the I2 planned business research and limited industrial district.
Okay, and how about the BP Business Park District? That would be on pages 18 and 19.
There will be permitted under letter B, uses permitted by right. Oh, excuse me, I apologize. Letter C, permitted conditional uses, number 18. The facility for the manufacture and assembly of any of the following products. Again, products from previously prepared non-toxic materials such as plastics, leathers, glass, cellophane, textiles, and so forth.
Okay.
Similar language to the I one.
And so to summarize, do you believe that the proposed use would be more appropriately located in one of the three districts you just mentioned? In East
I will
Ocean Township?
take it a step further and say that in my opinion, one of these three districts is the only appropriate location in this township for a use such as this.
All right, so just to wrap up this portion of your testimony, and we don't have too much more, but so in your professional opinion, is the proposed CZ woodworking business a business that is customarily associated with a single-family residential dwelling?
It is not.
In your professional opinion, is the proposed CZ woodworking business a business that is clearly incidental to the residential use of the dwelling?
My opinion is that it is not.
So in your professional opinion, is the proposed CZ woodworking business an accessory use within the meaning of the East Ocean Township Ordinance?
Not in how the framers of this ordinance designed it.
And therefore, should the CZ woodworking conditional use application be denied?
I believe it should be denied.
Are there any other additional reasons why, in your professional opinion, this application should be denied? I believe we already spoke about the nuisance standard of section J60 of the accessory use provisions, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any concern about there being more than one accessory use on this property based on the testimony you heard?
Yes, a concern is, I think, a good way of putting it. The ordinance sets up two potential types of home businesses, one being a home occupation, the other being a home-based business. And there is a provision in the ordinance that says you can have one, you can have the other, but you cannot have both. So the operation of a home occupation is one thing. The operation of a home-based business involving contracting or subcontracting even might be considered a home-based business. Then you would have a situation where two of them would be operated on the same property.
And is the section of the ordinance you're referencing, section 240-32J, number 2, number of uses on page 2 of the exhibit?
240-32 accessory uses, paragraph J, number 2, that is correct.
Okay. Do you have any concern based on the exhibits that you've seen and the testimony that you've heard about whether or not there is outside storage of equipment or products?
Yes, there is concern. I believe we saw storage of outside equipment and materials, namely the wood and the ladders.
Would you be referring to exhibit JB 24, photograph 1, page 2, correct?
Photograph 1 and page 2, page 1 and page 2, yes. Over.
So in your opinion, the Board of Supervisors should deny this application, correct?
That's correct.
But if they don't deny it and they approve it, does the Board of Supervisors have the ability to impose conditions on the grant of conditional use approval?
It does. I would argue that it has the responsibility to do so as well.
Are there any conditions that you feel would have to be imposed in order to lessen the adverse impacts that have been described or that are likely to occur?
Yes, there are several conditions of approval that I would recommend as a professional planner and expert in zoning. One would be with reference to the hours of operation, not so much regarding activities that are effectively noiseless. I don't think anyone's going to have a beef with the applicant designing a piece of furniture either on a computer or on paper at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. I don't think anyone's going to have a beef with the applicant sending out an invoice or writing checks to pay suppliers or utilities for that matter. But any activity that involves creation of noise that would involve virtually any power tool and numerous hand tools, hammers in particular, there may be others. Those should be limited to a narrower band of hours within the day to afford the neighbors the opportunity to have a sense of certainty as to when they might be confined to. And the hours might be 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So activities before 10, after 5, if they don't involve noise, have at it. If anything involves noise, then it should be limited to a relatively narrow band of hours. during the
How
day.
about doors and windows being open or closed?
Okay, that's another condition. We feel that a condition would be that any doors and windows need to be closed whenever any machine is operating or whenever any hand tool is being used that creates noise. I would also say if any activity is being engaged in that creates odors, such as painting or staining or lacquering or and so forth, or even the cleaning of tools, of paintbrushes after painting or lacquering or staining.
By the way, did you hear Mr. Zampano testify that there's no water in this
Do
facility?
you believe that I read that in the notes of testimony? Yes.
And do you have any thoughts about that in terms of what you just said about cleaning the equipment?
Right. There is at least one, and probably more than one, of the substances that Mr. Zampano has testified that he would use to put a finish on a piece of work that involve either the cleaning of brushes or sponges, any other method of applying these finishes, either with water or with solvents, which again have aromas. And by aromas, I mean odors.
I'm going to object. I mean, is he testifying as a land use planner or is this as a hobbyist woodworker? I think this goes beyond the scope of any expertise he may have as a land use planner.
I mean, I tend to agree, and I'll sustain the objection. It calls for a lot of speculation as far as what products and what methods of disposal and frequency of use and those sorts of things. So I just don't see that question being relevant.
What about a condition relating to employees?
The number of employees should be limited to the lowest number possible. The ordinance obviously permits one. The preference would be to have 0 employees.
I'm going to object. I mean, there's just no foundation for any of this testimony concerning what should or shouldn't be done or why these things should be limited.
I think as a land planner, I think he's certainly, it's within his expertise to talk about appropriate conditions to apply to a proposed use.
I'll allow that question.
The number of employees has several implications. One is that if there is an employee, that means there are 2 people in the shop at once, which means there is a potential for 2 pieces of machinery to be used at any given time instead of just one, which again increases the potential for noise and odors and all of the other impacts more than if just one person were operating the shop. It also means that there will be an additional vehicle parked in the driveway. And we need to mention, I think, for the record, that there are two large vehicles to be used for this business. One is a large GMC Sierra pickup truck. The other is a large enclosed trailer. And they are going to be parked on this property, we presume, every day. If you bring in an employee, that means there's going to be a third, effectively a third commercial vehicle on this property during business days. We are now getting into the territory of a small commercial parking lot instead of a residential setting.
How about buffering and landscaping? Do you support Ms. Bean's desire for buffering and landscaping to be added?
Yes.
If this use is approved?
Yes, the buffering and landscaping is not going to do a great deal to attenuate the sound, but will, I believe, if done right, if designed right and administered and executed correctly, provide some buffering for the visual impacts of the building, of the lights of the building. We're talking about the garage, the shop. Also, it will help to buffer the site of the small commercial parking lot. Again, we're looking at 2 or 3, sometimes maybe even 4 or 5 commercial vehicles at times when Mr. Zampano has the need for additional help.
I'm going to object. There's been no testimony and speculation he's going to have 5 commercial vehicles on the property.
He did testify exactly that.
5?
He said there will be
That's
people.
my objection.
He said there will be people who help him carry large items out of his shop.
I think the record speaks for itself. We heard what the testimony was, and the board has access to those transcripts, so let's move along.
Your point is that any such persons would have a car, correct?
But presumably, and the point we're working on here is that buffering and landscaping will help to soften the view of these vehicles from the neighboring properties.
Do you have any thoughts about a condition regarding customers coming to the property and retail sales?
Yes, there should be no retail sales. This should not be a gallery or a showroom. It should be, if it's to be permitted at all, it should be only for the manufacturing of the pieces.
Finally, one section that we talked about briefly, but I didn't ask you about, was section 240-7 of the ordinance. It's in the R2 district, I believe, or right before the intent of residential districts. Do you have that section?
I do.
Okay. In your opinion, does this proposed use satisfy the intent provisions as outlined in section 240-7?
It does not, specifically with respect to paragraph C, protecting residential areas against noise, vibration, smoke, odors, and so forth, objectionable influences, having a business in the residential neighborhood. I don't think there is a great concern about heavy truck traffic or, too much density of population. And then letter H, to promote the most desirable use of land, would suggest to me the desire to keep a residential neighborhood residential,
Okay.
as opposed to allowing businesses in it.
I don't have any further questions for Mr. Babbitt.
Thank you. Ms. Setzler, do you have questions for Mr. Babbitt?
I do not.
Mr. Millier, do you have questions for Mr. Babbitt?
I do not.
If the other gentleman who has party status has left.
Mr. Thompson, do you have examination for Mr. Babbitt?
A few questions.
Sure, please proceed.
Good evening, Mr. Babbitt.
Good evening.
I believe you said you have a wood shop in your basement, is that correct?
I do.
And what's the size of that wood shop?
Approximately 10 by 12, perhaps.
Okay, so it's not quite 500 square feet, correct?
It's nowhere near 500 square feet.
And how often do you use your wood shop?
Other than for storage of tools, when was the last time I actually built something in my wood shop? Late last year.
So having a wood shop, though, you would agree is something that is traditionally accessory to residential uses, such as your wood shop, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And just so that we're clear, you're not an expert on the propagation of sound or noise, correct?
That's correct. I have worked on projects where there have been sound experts involved. I am familiar with zoning provisions regarding sound, but I have not conducted those studies myself.
And when you were at the property, I think you said you walked up and down the property line, did you hear any aircraft, lawnmowers, anything, any of those types of sounds?
I don't recall anything that stood out. No.
Were you listening for those types of sounds?
Yes.
You didn't hear anyone running a saw or a backhoe or any types of sounds like that?
No, there may have been trash pickup.
Trash
Which would have
pickup.
been, you know, a truck visiting the cul-de-sac for 4 minutes or something.
Right, what did that sound
It sounded like a truck picking up garbage.
like? Banging and noise.
I don't remember banging. I just remember mostly the motor noise.
Right. And no lawnmowers.
I don't recall anyone.
But generally, okay.
But
But those are the types of sounds that you would hear in a residential neighborhood, correct?
Absolutely, we expect people to mow their lawns.
Okay.
Yes. We don't expect people to run landscaping businesses out of residential neighborhoods, however.
Now, there's a picture of a pile of wood, I think that you referred to. A24, A20, pardon me, JB 24. I think
Yes,
you speculated that that was the type of wood that you would use in a wood shop. Is that correct?
yes, it doesn't look like firewood to me.
Is that wood that someone could use on their property for personal reasons? I mean, if you have a wood shop, could you store wood on your property and use it as a hobbyist?
I do store wood on my property, probably a quantity 1/20th of what I'm looking at here.
Well, let's just say you have no knowledge and no indication, you don't know what that wood is being used for, correct?
That is correct. What I'm saying is that I question whether it's being used for firewood.
Well, I don't think anyone ever said that it was being used for
I'm
fire.
quite certain that Mr. Zambano did say that it was used for
So
firewood.
what about the wood that's in the back there, that's leaning up against? Could you use that for firewood?
I'm sure you could cut up boards and stick them in a fireplace. That's true. But it doesn't, to me, firewood looks completely different. I have some experience in firewood as well. I'm not an expert in firewood. I do, chop my own logs, and a stack of firewood doesn't look like this.
So you could burn this wood as firewood, right?
You could burn down your house if you wanted to.
That's not the question I asked.
But yes.
You could burn this wood as
You could burn this wood as
firewood, right?
firewood.
But you don't know what this wood's being used for. You're just speculating, is that correct?
I am questioning the
No, just say yes or no. You don't know what it's being used for.
Correct.
You're just speculating. And if a resident wanted to stack wood on the side of his shed, that he was using that wood for some residential accessory purpose, such as burning or using it in his hobby wood shop, would be nothing illegal about that anyway, correct?
Objection. I mean,
He's been interpreting the ordinance all night. I'm asking whether or not there's anything that would prevent
Well,
a
yeah,
resident
with
from
this
storing wood on the
this
side of his
revision,
shed.
Where's the shed? I think it's just not.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think that the question was, generally speaking, is it violative of any provision of the ordinance?
I think that depends on where.
Well, I think we should allow the expert to answer
We
the
know what
question.
zone it is.
But you didn't mention a zone, Mr. Fox.
The objection is overruled. Let's let the expert answer the question.
I think it is possible to be used for personal services, personal reasons.
And there wouldn't be any issue from a zoning perspective if it was just stacked wood that Mr. Zampano intended on using for his own personal
Same
reasons. Is that
objection.
correct?
If it's not associated with an accessory use or home occupation, that's correct.
And it's not, if it's not associated with a business use, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And do you find this pile of wood objectionable?
Define objection.
I don't know, he's speculating as to what it was being used for.
To
I
me, it
mean,
looks
is
like,
this a neatly stacked pile of wood with a ladder on top of a tarp?
that's true. It looks like a neatly stacked pile of wood with two ladders on top of two tarps.
And that
But
would be
that's-
something that you would customarily associate with a residential use. I mean, this isn't in fact an industrial type of setup that's on the side of the shed.
It's unclear because what we don't know is whether the wood, or for that matter, the ladders, are being used for personal use or for potentially the home occupation itself.
Let's go through the standards in subsection 6 of the home occupation. You've read the application and you've reviewed the testimony. You would agree that the use itself is being proposed inside of a structure, correct? And I'm looking at subsection A, it says within a structure accessory to the principal residential dwelling located on the same lot as the principal residence.
You under section
Section
240-32
This is page 3.
J.
6,
6A.
standards for a home occupation.
Yes.
So, let me ask the question. So you would agree that the use that's being proposed, the woodshop use, is proposed to be located inside of a structure accessory to a principal residential dwelling located on the same lot as the principal residence?
Objection only to the extent that, I asked Mr. Babbitt about specific provisions. I don't think it's Mr. Babbitt's job to go through every provision and try to make the applicant's case for them.
And he provided expert opinion on these specific standards. I think I can cross-examine him on them.
I agree, the objection is overruled.
Okay,
To the
answer the question.
To the extent that the property doesn't include things like outdoor storage or other items that are not permitted in the ordinance, and it's a big if it is conducted exclusively within the garage or the house, then it would satisfy. Okay?
But the application proposes to conduct the use inside the accessory garage, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, but you reviewed the
Right,
application,
we
correct?
could
You
look
reviewed the
at it again,
testimony?
yes.
Okay. And do you have any reason to believe that the garage is a structure that isn't accessory to the residential dwelling on the property? Is that
No.
garage the type of garage that you would anticipate in a residential neighborhood?
I have a neighbor who just had delivered the same garage to his house 3 doors away. The issue isn't the garage.
Well, let's say the size of the use, that's subsection B. The size of the use as defined by the ordinance is 500 square feet, correct?
That's correct.
So 500 square feet is the limit on an accessory home occupation, correct? This is
Yes.
the square footage, right? So East Goshen Township has determined that if you go beyond 500 square feet, then you're something that's not considered a home occupation, right?
Or that a home occupation would not be permitted.
Correct. And we're proposing to have no more than 500 square feet, correct?
Honestly, well,
You don't know?
no, there's a potential for exceeding the 500 square feet, actually several ways. One would be, I would argue that it's exceedingly
Oh, wait,
difficult.
don't argue. Just answer the question. We proposing 500 square feet, correct?
Your application says 500 square
Right.
feet, but I believe some of the testimony suggests more than that.
The application. You
Yes.
reviewed it and it says
Yes.
500 square feet. Okay. So, subsection C, the appearance. Is there anything from the outside appearance of the garage or the property that would indicate that a home occupation is going to be proposed or done on that property? You walk the property line.
Right. No, not to the building.
No. Okay.
It could be used as a garage. The building can be a garage, it can be a wood shop, it can be a garage, as it was intended.
There's a wood shop inside of a garage, but from an appearance standpoint, if you're standing on the property line, you wouldn't have any indication that there was anything going on that wasn't residential, correct?
Depending upon 40 or 50
I'm
other
just
factors.
talking about
Yes.
appearance. Okay,
Yes.
that's subsection C. Now, subsection D talks about noise, vibration, glare. These are levels customarily generated by a residential use. Would an individual be able to have a wood shop in a garage or a wood shop like you in your basement? Would would that generate noise at levels customarily generated by a residential use?
I believe the answer would be no. A hobbyist wood shop would not create
So the
noise.
tools of a hobbyist wood shop, and again, you're not a noise expert, but wouldn't those levels be the same as somebody who's operating? Essentially-
Objection, Mr. Thompson has already stated that Mr.
He provided
That is not-
opinion, we went through this section on
But you
nuisances.
just said he's not a noise expert, and he testified he's not a noise expert. Now you're asking him about his opinion about noise.
I'm asking about his, I'm asking about his interpretation of subsection D.
The objection is overruled. Please answer the question.
So if your question is, will
I'm talking about noise levels customarily generated by residential use. You said hobbyists have these types of tools, and that's a residential use. How would that sound be any different?
I don't, first of all, several ways. One is, I don't think most hobbyists have these types of tools. We don't have 35 of them, so the number of tools is one issue.
Well, how many tools can you operate at one time? Just one, correct?
No.
Objection, I just think Mr. Thompson's being argumentative. Let the witness answer the question. You know, this is an argument, this is cross-examination, not argument.
The tools that Mr. Zampano has testified that he will use are larger than the typical hobbyist's tools. They're certainly larger and far nicer than any tool I have. Probably any one of his power tools costs more than every one of my power tools combined. I believe that they will be more powerful, and therefore there is the potential for more noise. There are more of them. Some of them are going to be used at the same time. In particular, things like filtration systems and things that are going to be on steadily.
Well, let me stop you there. You're going beyond the question that I answered.
Just
You
from
can still have the same types of tools and be a hobbyist, correct? It's not based on the
I believe
amount of
he
money you spend for these tools,
asked and
is
answered,
it?
I believe he said no, but that is not.
I don't believe that a hobbyist would have this set of tools or this number of
But
tools.
a hobbyist can buy as many tools as he wanted to have, correct?
That's true.
That's true.
A hobbyist could buy the most powerful and loudest tool available on the market.
Do you have anything that
But,
quantifies?
but let me finish the answer.
I'm sorry,
Guys,
that was
you're
answered.
talking on each other.
He answered the question. I think I have a right to have my questions answered.
I assumed I had the right to finish an answer to a question that was posed by the attorney.
because there was people talking over other people, I don't know where we are, quite frankly. So let's reset. Let's speak one at a time. Mr. Thompson, can you please ask the question of this witness?
What are you basing your opinion on that hobbyist tools make different noises than tools that someone who might pay a little bit more money for? You have anything to base that opinion on?
It would seem obvious to me that a large,
Just answer the question, yes or no.
tool. Do I have anything to base it on? Yes, common sense.
A more powerful tool,
A more
make a
powerful
louder
tool
noise.
has the potential to make a much louder noise.
Okay. Subsection E talks about storage. You don't know whether or not there's any outside storage associated with this use, correct?
No knowledge, correct, just supposition. Observation.
And subsection H allows at least one employee that's not a family member, correct?
That's correct.
So specifically related to home occupations, the township has dictated that someone who would engage in a home occupation is allowed to have one employee, correct?
That is correct.
And that employee would necessarily have to come to the property, presumably by vehicle, and park his vehicle somewhere?
However that person arrives, that person arrives.
Okay. You talked about the proposed wood shop use as a manufacturing use, correct?
Yes,
And you indicated that this particular use would be the type of use that would be located in the industrial zoning districts. I think it was I-1 and I-2. Is that correct?
And the business district, I forget the name of the last one, yes.
Would you expect a manufacturing use in the industrial zoning district to be 500 square feet or less in size?
I think it's entirely possible, yes.
It's possible.
Sure.
Do you know if it's permanent?
Excuse me, if
Do
it's
you know
what,
if it would be permanent?
in terms of
Permitted
what?
to have a 500 square foot manufacturing use in the industrial zoning district?
I think a situation where you have an old industrial building or warehouse that's been divided up into spaces for artisans, craftsmen, workshops would be entirely appropriate, and I've seen this type of development, especially in older river boroughs or railroad boroughs. It is not at all outlandish to consider a 500 square foot or 1,000 square foot or a 1,500 square foot industrial use in a larger building.
And we're talking about manufacturing here, correct?
Yes,
And you had indicated that the manufacturing is of goods or wares, correct?
according to the definition,
According to the definition you cited.
that's correct.
And a custom-made piece of furniture is a good or ware in your opinion?
It is. It's not a service.
Isn't, from a land use perspective, a manufacturing use more akin to making multiple of the same type of good or ware?
I think from a land use perspective, from a zoning perspective, it's the manufacturing use that is the issue, not the number of items that might be identical to one another, not the length of time it takes to make each individual item. It's the actual use of the property.
Okay, and if you made the table or the chair in your basement, or if Mr. Zampano decided he wanted to make one for his parents, that wouldn't be a manufacturing use, correct?
That is correct.
But the home occupation is commercial use, correct?
In most instances, yes.
Well, it is an occupation, correct?
Yes,
People engage in occupations in order to make money, correct?
usually.
Would you agree with that? Is that a yes or a no?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes, of course.
Okay. So there is a commercial use that's permitted on the property as accessory, correct?
In some instances, yes.
Are you aware of any other woodshop uses that are in the township that have been permitted as home occupations?
I believe we discussed one such use that had been permitted by the township a number of years ago, decades ago possibly, and I believe the answer is only one.
Maybe I can refresh your memory. Exhibit 815, you read the testimony. Is that a permit for, what is that?
It is a home occupation permit application submitted by Lewis F. Smith Jr. for a Strasburg Road property. Nature of business, furniture making or woodworking.
And that's permitted, that's a permit for a home occupation, correct?
Objection, that's not what it is. Permit application.
Yes, it is.
Well, I'm sorry, does that say approved on it? At the bottom?
It does say approved, there's a signature and a date, 1992.
And so would any woodworking or furniture making shop that's been permitted as a home occupation be a manufacturing use that's required to be in an industrial business zoning district? Or is it just this one?
No, anyone.
Anyone?
Right.
I'll show you an aerial. There it goes. Property that's outlined in red. Take a look at that on the sides. Is this something that looks like it was generated by the Chester County Geographic Information System?
Appears to be.
Okay. And the property that's outlined in red, the information for that property would be on the right-hand side, correct?
In very small way.
Is that indicated to be the owner of Lewis Smith Jr.?
I believe so.
And is the tax parcel number 53619?
I'm gonna have to take your word for it. That's a little bit too small for my eyes.
And that would be, is that the tax parcel number that's indicated on the permit for the home occupation?
Yes, it appears to be.
Now, looking at the residential neighborhood here, would you agree that
Objection to relevance of this. It's beyond the scope of direct, number one. It's, we don't know the zoning of this property, we don't know what the ordinance was applicable at the time, we don't know if this permit is still in effect. We don't know the nature of what is done pursuant to this permit, if it is still in effect. I just, I don't think it's relevant and it's beyond the scope.
I'm sorry, the witness testified that these types of woodworking and furniture making home occupation uses should only be permitted in the industrial zoning district. And this is evidence to demonstrate that East Goshen Township permits it. This is the same zoning district as the applicants.
We don't
In
know.
residential zoning. I can put on,
You're testifying, Mr. Thompson, there's no foundation for this. We don't know the nature of what this use is. So I don't think it's relevant whatsoever to Mr. Babbitt's.
I'm sorry, it says on the permit, furniture making and woodworking.
Yeah, I think that there was no objection to exhibit A15 when it was testified to earlier, and I see this as a supplement to it. It provides additional information, the tax parcels match. It appears to be in a residential neighborhood. I mean,
Yeah,
it's quite clear what.
Exhibit A15 hasn't been moved for initially, I was going to object to it because it is not relevant. We have no foundation as to.
I'm sorry, I think you overruled the objection, Mr. Jones.
I did overrule the objection.
Can I ask the question?
Yes, please ask the question, and Ms. Boswell, you'll have an opportunity when all exhibits are moved for admission to make your objections again at that point.
So the property that's subject to A15, the permit for furniture making and woodworking. From this aerial, can you tell whether or not that's located in a residential neighborhood?
It appears to be surrounded at least on three sides by
Are
residents.
you familiar with Strasburg Road? in
Yes, but not-
Township?
Yes, but not every property.
And that's a residential road, correct, that goes through residential neighborhoods?
Strasburg Road, I'm looking at the zoning map right now, appears to have residential zoning on both sides for its entire distance. What I don't know is how many non-conforming existing uses that might not be residential along Strasburg Road. What I do know is that Strasburg Road is a major thoroughfare. It is hardly a residential street exclusively. It is obviously not a cul-de-sac, and it's not the same context as Arley Circle.
Well, let me just ask you. Sure. Are the lots that are shown in this aerial, are they smaller than the lots that would be on Ardley Circle?
Yes,
Yes.
at least most of them. The ones on this, what appear to be the south side of Strasburg Road, appear to be much larger.
The ones adjacent to the woodworking use, they're
On the
half
same,
acre.
on the same side of Strasburg Road, yes, there are
half acre
roughly the
lots.
same size, yes.
Right. And so would this be the type of property that you anticipate having a woodworking shop, or would there be an issue with this from a land use perspective?
I think there very well could be several issues with having a furniture manufacturing establishment on this property.
But yet, East Goshen Township, you would agree pursuant to A15 has permitted this as a home occupation in this residential neighborhood, correct?
If A15 is accurately shown and has not been changed,
The impact could be more of an impact, given the fact they're smaller lots.
it could very well be, yes.
Are we marking that exhibit as A19?
Please.
Which one, the aerial is A19?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any additional questions for your witness, Ms. Boswell?
Is everyone else done?
I believe so.
Yes, I do. Mr. Babbitt, with regard to.
Microphone, please.
Thank you. Mr. Babbitt, with regard to exhibit A15, do we know the extent of that use, furniture making / woodworking?
I don't know anything about the extent of that, other than that it's on that particular property and the date, I suppose, maybe the owner.
Do we know what the zoning ordinance was pursuant to which this application was made and apparently permit issued?
No, I do not. I will call your attention to the fact that the home occupation standards of the ordinance have been amended several times since that application was submitted and approved. Under section 240-32, paragraph J, home occupation, the ordinance says that it was amended in 2001 and 2003.
Do we even know the zoning district of this property? Mr. Thompson testified, which I think, do we know?
Assuming that the top of the page is north, assuming that that is the case, it would be in the R2 district because the entire length of Strasburg Road in the township on the north side is R2.
But we don't know what the R2 district regulations were in 1992, do we?
That is correct.
Do we know if anything that might have been made pursuant to this permit application has been sold?
There's no way of knowing, or I don't have any way of knowing.
Do we know the square footage associated with this business?
I do not.
Do we know whether customers come to the property?
I do not know of any way of knowing whether any customer has ever come to the property.
Do we have any way of knowing whether there's any analogous purpose? Whether there is any comparison between this use that's represented in A15 and this proposed Zampano use?
No, we don't. We don't even know if the applicant even made one single stick of furniture in this dwelling or on this property as a result of this application.
Are you familiar with Mr. Smith at all? Mr. Lewis F. Smith Jr., Township Manager?
Not directly. We haven't had the pleasure of being introduced yet.
Are you aware that Mr. Smith is the Township Manager?
I am.
And that typically that profession requires a lot of night meetings?
Sadly, I'm all too familiar with the number of night meetings that might be attended by town.
And certainly the Township Manager is a full-time job outside the home, is that correct?
Probably far more than a full-time job.
Okay, so given that, would you expect that the level of furniture making / woodworking would be anything nearly comparable to what Mr. Zampano is proposing?
I would expect it not to be anything comparable to what is being proposed here.
And also, do you see any other exhibits that talk about furniture making or woodworking being permitted or being existing uses in East Goshen Township? In other words, is this the only exhibit that talks about furniture making and woodworking that's been presented by the applicant?
I believe it is.
So do you think the fact that there might be one furniture making woodworking license issued, the details of which we have no knowledge, would be enough to change your opinion as to whether or not the Zampano proposed use is customarily incidental to a residential use?
No, I've seen nothing that's going to change my opinion.
Mr. Thompson was asking you questions about the sounds and whether they're typical in residential areas, correct?
Yes,
Would you, he mentioned lawnmowers, trash trucks, correct?
we discussed lawnmowers and trash trucks, yes.
Is there a difference in the quality of those sounds and the quantity of those sounds and the length of time those sounds exist in a residential neighborhood versus what potentially could happen?
Yes, of course. Again, that was the discussion of the scale of the use. If somebody wants to make a table and it takes 2 weeks of working 1 hour a day, something like that, that's one thing. When the use exists for potentially the entire business day and an extended business day, 5 days a week, that's a considerably different animal altogether.
Mr. Thompson was questioning section 6A on page 3 of exhibit JB 26. And I believe you said something like, if indeed the activities took place within the garage, that section would be satisfied. But did you mean only with respect to that portion of A that talks about the use being inside?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yes, Mr. Thompson was questioning you about the use being conducted entirely within the principal dwelling unit. And you said that if that were the case, that this section would be satisfied. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes.
But you only meant with respect to that portion of subsection A, correct? That wouldn't prove that the home occupation was an accessory use clearly incidental, correct?
Oh, I see what you mean, yes, that is correct.
Okay,
Yes, just by virtue of the fact that it would be entirely within the principal building or an accessory building does not alone make it clearly incidental to the residential use.
you also said to Mr. Thompson that the testimony presented during these hearings indicated that there's potential for this use to extend beyond 500 square feet. Could you give the reasons for that statement?
Well, there's two reasons in particular. One is the building that has been installed is greater than 500 square feet, and it would become a significant challenge to the township to ensure that only 500 square feet would be used for the potential home occupation at any given time. In addition, we've heard testimony that there's going to be use of paints and other
Objection,
finishes.
there was no testimony that Mr. Zapata was gonna paint anything at the property.
There's testimony that he was storing paints. I think is that the respect you meant when you said use of paint?
Oh, I believe he testified that he sometimes paints pieces of furniture.
I think that testimony was that he painted off-site.
Do you have a question?
Well,
I'll have a question, let's proceed.
my point is, if you paint something, or if you stain something or lacquer something, what you use to apply the paint, the stain, the lacquer needs to be cleaned. In latex paints, for example, you clean it with water in a sink. There is no water service provided to this building, which means that in order to clean the paintbrushes, the applicant would need to carry them to the house, presumably, and clean the brushes in a room of the house, which would be in addition to the 500 square feet of the proposed use. I would also think that there's a possibility that certain things can be cleaned by a hose outside of the building. If someone brings a hose down and cleans off a paintbrush, but that would not be environmentally sound because the material would end up on the lawn. Those are the two reasons why I would conjecture that there may be further use of either the garage itself or elements of the house towards the home occupation beyond the 500 square foot limit.
I think that's all I have.
Are there any additional questions for this witness? Okay. Fine.
Hey, one moment, bear with me here. I assume the board has no questions. No, I know, the board has no additional questions for the witness. Okay, we'll take questions from the public at this point. I'm gonna ask you to approach the podium, provide your name and address, and keep in mind that they will be questions, not opinions, as it pertains to this witness's testimony.
Sure. Hi, my name is Jim Cuccinata.
Spell your last name, please.
Cucinotta.
Address?
1342 Hollyberry Lane, in East Goshen. Also, the reason I'm here is I have
No opinions, just questions for the witness.
Oh, okay,
You'll
okay.
have a chance
Okay.
subsequent to render opinions, but just questions for this witness.
Thank you, Mr. Bobbitt. I appreciate you coming here and speaking on behalf with your expertise. I wanted to ask you something you said earlier, really when we began. You were talking about that you were a witness, or you've done sort of testimonial things in other municipalities. Did you say that?
Yes, I've testified scores of times, maybe more than 100, I've not counted them.
Okay. In rooms like this?
Yes,
Okay. For other townships outside of East Goshen?
yes,
I was just curious, when you come into these township buildings like this, when you see signs on the wall that say East Goshen, where you're preserving the past, serving the present, protecting the future, is that sign in every one of these municipalities that you?
no, it's not.
It's not. So this message here on the wall over the board is speaking to preserving the past, serving the present, protecting the future. Do you believe you were here, actually invited here on behalf of, I guess it was Mrs. Bean who invited you to actually give an expert testimony in order to serve the neighborhood, serve her, preserve the neighborhood?
Well, I'll answer it this way. I was asked to come by Ms. Bean to testify and take notes and so forth in order to ensure that my opinions regarding this application are heard by this board in an effort either to have the board deny the application or at the very least apply appropriate conditions to the approval of the application. Insofar as doing so might result in preserving the past, serving the present, and protecting the future, I suppose that they may be parallel, but doing these things wasn't my primary goal.
It wasn't your primary goal, but it functions as the message for what this township has stood for, or what it says it stands for, which is preserving a neighborhood in its current existence.
That much, yes, there was considerable testimony that this is a desirable residential neighborhood that ought to be preserved, and one of the ways of doing that is denying the application.
Which again, you are serving the folks that are present in this room, the majority of the neighborhood.
In an indirect way, yes.
And lastly, you are protecting the future with this application, because if the board was to approve this application, this potentially could open a can of worms for future, maybe getting grandfather some clauses in. And just my opinion, I'm no expert, but I'm just thinking about, I think the majority of the neighborhood is interested in protecting the future of their neighborhood. And therefore, just pointing to the message of East Goshen Township which is the mission, which is why most people are living here, why I'm, before I got to say, the reason why I'm actually in this room is because I had an offer on Bramble. So I live in East Goshen, and I put a offer in on a house, another house within East Goshen, because I believe in East Goshen, and I believe in this board. And last comment, and I will sit down.
Only questions at this point. So if you can ask a question, feel free, but otherwise, comments and opinions will be later. Okay,
I will ask no more questions.
thank you. I'm just trying to do my job. All right, at this point in time, customary with our practice and prior hearings, the board desires to call a recess for the evening. We're gonna go. We have no more questions for you. You're excused. Thank you. We're gonna go off the record for scheduling and logistical purposes at this point.
Ms. Boswell.
Yes,
Do you have additional witnesses?
No. No.
Setzler, I anticipate you have a number of witnesses, including those neighbors that are represented.
Yes, we have 3.
Any additional witnesses beyond those 3?
I have an expert witness and the neighbors.
Okay, so 4 witnesses in total? Is what presently?
3 in total.
Okay, very good.
All right. Let's try to do this better than last time. We are looking for dates in September. Does September 10th work, this coming Tuesday?
I'll make it work.
Yes. Let me, try to pull up the,
Understood, yeah.
Somebody else.
If she can be here, she can't have the transcript for tonight ready.
Yeah. Why not?
the danger.
I don't believe we'll need a transcript because Ms. Boswell's case is essentially rested, so I don't think the supervisors will be lost. They can catch up after the fact, as long as all council is okay with that.
Mr. Hines has a conflict on the 10th, it's a township meeting.
Is that in East Bradford or West Bradford?
Correct.
12.
Thursday the
12th.
I'm in the
Okay.
Friday the 13th.
Daytime.
Do we want to do a daytime hearing?
No.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's not about that. 17th. It is. Yeah.
Mr. Hines is not available, he's out of state the 17th.
The 19th looks good.
Oh, that's right. I'll be glad to Friday.
Saturday morning for 3 hours. Every Saturday morning till we get up.
The 11th of September.
I'm good.
Yes.
Let's
Next
yes,
one.
let's do this, guys.
One.
Guys, okay, next Wednesday?
Let's hear a yes from everybody.
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question about what you said about the other supervisors not having the transcript to read before the hearing.
Right.
I'm concerned about that a little bit. Are you making it, would you intend to make a decision at this next hearing? Because I don't think that's fair to my client.
I can't speak for the board as to whether it intends to render a decision at the conclusion of next hearing. Just the way this thing is going and the complexity of the legal issues, I think the board might take the issues under advisement and use its time as permitted by the MPC.
My only objection to a date where Ms. Fitzpatrick could not get the testimony done would be for that reason.
Understood. Okay, otherwise you have no objection?
No, on the 11th?
It's just the three of us yet, and I.
Oh, they're not back yet next week?
I will
Alright, so it's a
guarantee
non-issue.
I will not make a decision.
All right, well,
Just one person.
let's hold off on that talk. But it doesn't,
I have a problem with you.
Oh, Janet. Oh, Janet.
all right, so the 11th is not workable.
All right, now listen.
Monday the 16th.
For 18 years, I've had to come back on my vacation. I'm on vacation. I have to come back.
Time is not available that whole week, he's out of state.
The week of the 16th?
The 11th is good.
17th's no good, the 19th's no good, the 18th I can do it, but not till 17th.
And the answer is one. Your 11 is.
Is it the 18th that, the 18th that should? I can't do it. Oh, yeah.
All right, let's look at the 11th for a second. You can't, it's an unavoidable conflict.
Unless somebody's willing to drive my water somewhere.
Well,
Uber,
I'll
try
drive
Uber.
No, it's the 18th, but Rose Hill has that.
We do it.
Yeah, we do. 18th is the
Do the what?
In the afternoon?
No.
She's taking a class from 5 to
So she has to be dropped off at 5.
5, picked up at 8,
Uber.
and my granddaughter has gymnastics from 4:30 to 6:30. So I'm gonna be.
The 18th is not workable for a number of people.
Okay.
And the boardroom is.
Mr. Hines is unavailable the week of the 16th. Monday the 23rd,
We're not at, we're at,
Tuesday the 24th.
that's,
We're in Baltimore, but we'll,
I'll be
I
back.
think we'll be back.
You'll be back.
I'll be back. That's Tuesday.
That's the day before my surgery.
So
I'm fine, no, I don't wanna miss this.
can you do it on the 24th?
I'll do it on the 24th.
Okay.
So you will not be here.
But I can't start until 7.
24th at 7
Janet,
p.m.
it gets tough.
24th,
The 24th, can we do anything to help you get here early? What do you need?
Tuesday,
Karen
he's
to drive my granddaughter.
Mr. Hines needs to be present in all township meetings.
he's a supervisor, yes.
I can probably get here earlier and find someone to drive her back.
Working on it. Working
The
on it.
25th is available. The next evening.
Yeah, that's his surgery.
That's his surgery.
Are we back to the 11th?
That's just.
Oh, it's 11. I can do 18,
That's not workable.
and I can do, 25th is difficult. I can do 24th,
Mr. Hines cannot. 26th.
26th.
I am in surgery the 25th.
Probably 9th of October.
I'm willing to come back from the shore and cancel surgery almost. You can't do it. Well, Jesus, I'll do whatever I have to do.
He's got major surgery. Yeah, I've had the same.
I will do whatever I have to do. I don't want to miss this.
We agreed the 9th, 10th of.
This is from the interest.
The 10th works.
Isn't the 10th?
I think Jack said he couldn't make it. September.
And
we're working back, we're just jumping back and forth now on dates. I mean, if the 24th works, I'll be here.
24th is not working.
So,
26th, September 26th.
There's, the room is reserved for the East Coast Democrats.
can we turn in another room?
They have the boardroom and they have their big group with CR.
No, they won't give it up. They will give it up. Well, no, you gotta do it.
We're gonna make it on the 24th.
Mr. Hines comes up.
You can't, Jack?
Just we filed this application in March.
Mark, you hear us trying.
We're trying to
I'm
get.
going through every day of the week, and sometimes I heard, how much we're trying.
Basically, 100 days worth of
The other problem is, if you lose one of the supervisors, you're gonna lose him for 3 years if you don't do it.
Let's do it.
He's trying. Let's figure out a date.
Why couldn't we do the 11th?
Because
Jen.
I've got,
You need someone picked up.
I've got
Guys, maybe this one.
gymnastics and I've got.
And maybe it's
There's no one else in the
BR, Hartley is BR, and that's the boardroom for 9 as well.
Can we move the?
See, that's what I'm saying, it's like a conference room.
Janet, I know Ariana and Sarah, I can drive you around.
That's a lot of.
I'm a mom, I'm used to it. I mean, they know me, I know them both, I mean, I can drive them around,
Okay.
okay?
Come up afterwards.
Okay.
All right, the 11th is back on the table, it sounds like, thank you.
Is this a party? I don't know, a party?
Yeah, it's the wife of the.
Driving
Yeah.
a board member?
Should we object to a wood shop owner being on the township
All
board?
right, let's.
I'm just saying, you know.
No, it's very, no, let's stop this, it's a good point. She is married to a party, that's
Okay,
inappropriate.
I'm sorry,
I'm not.
I appreciate the offer.
I'm just trying to.
Guys, we're doing the 26th at 6 p.m. Right?
Are you available, Martha?
He's not with the other supervisor.
Surgery the 25th.
The other supervisor will be back.
The other supervisor will be back and we'll have the
23rd?
no
At
participation.
6 o'clock.
He said he.
Oh, good.
I gotta stay up.
You will not
He
be.
will not, he has been turned out for another meeting because the other two guys from that didn't start out. That's the, so he has had a major surgery, probably out of commission for 3 weeks.
I understand.
He's not gonna appreciate being dumped again. You can't keep.
I have come back from vacation for 18 years, no, let me finish. 18 years. I've canceled anniversaries, I've canceled birthdays, and I've done it without a problem. And I think the other board members should do the same thing. This is like major stuff here.
That's what we're talking about. You can't, you can't do this. You can't do that.
I got a question for you. Could Karen or somebody?
You gotta just, she can't go. She can't go.
If that's the only date we have done it, I hate to say it, but she's gonna have to skip the class.
Someplace. You can't do
We'll have to find somebody to do it.
Mr. Dennis, did the 23rd ever come up?
We're out of town.
It did.
We're involved.
The 11th.
Wait,
I can't.
back to 11? Back to 11?
Yeah.
Mark, thank you.
All right. Wednesday, September 11th at 6 p.m.
And I'm gonna hold 26 on this.
Janet,
No, she's not.
Mark
Well,
just said.
Mark said she's here. Mark just said she's here.
Yes.
Mark, Thank you.
6 PM on Wednesday, September
I'm
11th.
gonna check with Kim too, and maybe she can take some of the load. Mark. Mark,
I would appreciate that.
6 PM on Wednesday.
I have to talk, Karen might be able to do it, right?
All right, let's go back on the record.
All right, we're gonna go back on the record. Let's try to speak at one time. As we've done, Mr. Thompson, do you waive all pertinent MVC provisions regarding the time in which the board has to hear and render a decision on these applications through Wednesday, through and including Wednesday, September 11th?
Yes.
Thank you. Next order of business.
Starting at 6, but
I would like on the record to indicate that the transcript from tonight's proceedings will not be available by our next hearing, September 11th. But no council or party has any objection to proceeding on the 11th of September. Is that correct? Mr. Thompson?
No objection.
Ms. Boswell?
I repeat my concern about whether a decision would be rendered prior to the other supervisors having heard
But otherwise,
tonight's testimony.
you would have no objection to proceeding in that fashion, correct?
The other two supervisors are not here.
They're not gonna be here then either?
three of us.
Correct.
Three of you.
Correct.
Well, on that, no, as long as no
We'll have two
decision
sets.
is made until such time as all the supervisors have the chance to review all the
Understood.
evidence.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ms. Setzler, any objection?
None.
Thank you. Mr. Millier, any
No
objection?
objection.
Thank you.
Mr. Hines, Your Honor. Are you okay with that?
Seen that one. All right, so that we need not advertise for our next hearing, on the record, we are going to reconvene for hearing number 4, substantive hearing number 4, on Wednesday, September 11th, starting at 6 PM in this location, East Goshen Township Building. With that said, we are in recess. Thank you.
That one we're ready. Smile on my face. Send me, one way or another, let's get that. in. You have- yeah.
So I'll figure it out and I have the email address on my feed. from
Yeah,
my
one way or another,
commission.
or call us.
So does the other one go? Is it short?
No.
Yeah. I think my son did something to make it to the email, so I haven't.
Okay, good. Yeah, exactly.
What-